Hey there, I have a very special guest. It's an Aduthlete story today. We are going to talk with Bert, who is currently 66 years old. And one of the most striking experience that I read about him is that he went all across Canada with a canoe. And it's not only like just canoeing through Canada because the water streams are not always available, but it's also actually walking with a canoe and doing portage, which is basically just doing a lot of trips to move your canoe, your food, and everything that you need to survive. So prepare yourself. There's a lot of adventure and a lot of inspiration because honestly, he was 63 when he did this trip. And I'm not quite sure if I will be able to pull something out like that when I am 63. Definitely, I've not pulled out that yet. So, yeah, lots to be inspired. Stay tuned because this is definitely a story you don't want to miss. I'm EGR and this is Aduthlete. Hi, Bert. How are you today?
I'm very well, even though it might be a little bit earlier here than for you. I'm very well, thank you. And how are you?
Well, it's dark anyways,
Yeah, that's
like
right.
you cannot escape darkness.
No, no. Try as we might. Actually, that could be actually a lesson in life. Escaping darkness. That's my new book, Escaping Darkness. How about that?
Ah, interesting,
Yeah,
interesting. Then we will also talk about that.
yeah, we could.
So it's really interesting when we first talk because you've done so many things. Obviously, you are much older than me, so you
Yeah,
had a little bit more time to
yeah.
explore the world.
Yes.
But just for our listeners, let's start, from scratch. You've described yourself with someone who has a knack for knocking off the impossible.
Hmm.
And I really like this way of phrasing it. You went on a lot of adventures and yeah, you attempted things that normal people may never try to do in their lives. And
Hmm.
the first question I have for you is what actually drives you to do that?
Well, that's you have to have more than one driver. In the same way that I would say you have to have more than one why. If you have just one why, like what's driving you, and if I gave you, just this one thing, when things get hard, you will run out of whys very quickly. So the reason for you being out there is because of X, and it'll get hard enough that you'll begin to question what that is, and you'll come up with an answer that says that's not good enough, that's insufficient. I want to go home, which means that you have to have Y. You have to have another one, and you have to have an A and a B and a C and a D. So you have to have very many Ys in order for you to successfully do the things that are really hard. Otherwise, quite simply, you're just not going to. You'll just run out of Ys way too quickly. So what's driving me? I think there's more than one driver. Number one, I'm drawn to the hard things. I think there's a moral imperative for that. I think that well, firstly, nothing worth doing is easy. It was never meant to be easy. Life is not supposed to be easy. It's not a cakewalk. It's actually really, really hard. We happen to live, well, I certainly live in a society where um, we live like kings and queens compared to even 150 years ago. We live these extraordinary lives that we take completely for granted. And Canada, as an example, where I live, even though I live in the very southern part of Canada, if I were to go outside now and try to spend 24 hours outside with what I'm wearing right now, I would have a very difficult time making it to tomorrow. That's
Yeah.
just stepping outside my front door. So we're these incredibly fragile creatures living these incredibly privileged existences, at least for the most part. Of course, there are people who are suffering horribly in the world. I'm not saying that isn't the case at all, but speaking for myself, that um, again, in the fact that we take so much of this for granted, nothing in life was really meant to be easy, and anything worth doing is hard. Like there's all kinds of cliches around that. So I'm drawn to the hard things. I'm
Hmm.
pulled to them, and I think it's because they're worth doing. And then as I've grown older, as you've noticed, I've grown quite old. I realize that there's more than just being drawn. There's a moral imperative to it. Like there's I mean, if you think I mean think of having children is very hard, right? Caring for children is very hard. Caring for a husband or a wife or a spouse or partner is hard. But there's tremendous good that comes from that, obviously and clearly. But it's still hard, right? And just because it's hard, it does not mean that it's not worth engaging with. And when I
Hmm.
say engaging with, I don't use that word lightly. So when I say engage, I mean mentally, spiritually, emotionally, and physically. You have to have those four axes of your being have to be completely aligned for you to be successful at anything that you do. So when I say those four things, it just sounds hard right out of the box, right? You have to be mentally, physically, emotionally, and physically aligned. You go, wow, I'm going to watch Netflix. I want to lie down now. I've had it.
Yeah. But I think I think I was watching something on YouTube the other day, and I saw there was a real um, someone hiking very extremely dangerous paths, and they were like saying something interesting about most people do not perceive fear anymore in their lives.
Hmm.
Of course, I mean physical fear. Obviously, we perceive fear even too much because we are, in this modern world, we have a
Mhm.
lot of different issues derived from devices, from stressors, and so on. But like physical fear, this is not something, as you said, we are not used, we are privileged, most of us. And taking this out of the equation, well, it's not that good because,
Mhm.
as you said, you'll be just sitting on the couch, just watching Netflix and not really thinking about what am I gonna eat tomorrow.
Mhm.
You have everything provided to you, so this is probably one part that was good in our natural environment, and then
Mhm.
we lost it, and now we have to compensate somehow.
Well, I wouldn't necessarily agree with what he said because I think that, my conversations with people is that most of them are deathly afraid. They're deathly afraid of just about everything. And we live these insular lives, which is of course true. So he or she may be referring to that. But imagine you're driving down the freeway or maybe the autobahn, right? And and you're whizzing along at 120 or 30 or 40 or 60K. Here in Canada, it's 80. And
Oh
you
gosh.
might, yeah,
Seriously?
exactly. Oh my God. Yeah, it's exactly. So, and I
That's
grew
gonna
up in
be
a,
hard.
yeah, so I grew up in a place where there was no speed limit. But anyway,
Yeah, of
so,
course.
so imagine you're driving along and never in your wildest dreams do you ever entertain the thought that someone's going to come from the other side going equally as fast the other way into your lane and your life will be over like that. We're not afraid of that because we don't give it any thought.
Hmm.
So your mind does, it plays this very interesting trick on you. So if I ask you what would happen, or what if the cars from the other lane come into your lane on the autobahn? You go, well, that never happens, Bert. That never happens. So why worry about it? Because it never happens. So when you're presented with a low probability event, which is a car coming into your lane, your mind just literally just dismisses it as never happening. So you don't even think about it. However, it does happen, and when it does happen, it's catastrophic. So if I ask you, as opposed to what if I say, when the other car comes into your lane, what are you going to do? Your mind
Hmm.
doesn't think of this as a low probability event. You immediately start thinking of a solution. So if I ask you that question when you're driving down the highway, you would immediately probably move over into the other lane to get as far away from as possible.
Hmm.
So because these things, we live this insular life, the things don't happen. We never ask these questions. But if I ask you that question, you'll be immediately afraid. If I dropped you off in the forest without any electronic navigation at all, without a GPS or a cell phone, you would immediately start getting scared. Everybody, guaranteed, because we
Yeah.
have this innate fear of being lost. Every single one of us. It's one of the things that you can do to get as close as you possibly can to the experiences of those people who came before us. Certainly in Canada, people who mapped the country, all those sorts of things.
Hmm.
If and that's just dropping you off maybe 35 steps into the forest and taking away your cell phone, and that the fear, the gut, the visceral, terrible, awful feeling that sort of rises out of your gut, and then this huge weight of anxiety that starts pressing down on you is because you're afraid of getting lost. Most people who go to most people will tell you they don't like to lose. The people that say I don't like to lose sight of land if they're sailing, it's not because they're afraid of the sea or a big lake. It's because they've lost sight of the landmark, which means they're lost, which means they have no way to, there's no way to do I go left, right, up, down? I have no clue. What do I do now? I am lost. And that's a terrible, horrible feeling. If I told you, what if the grocery stores are empty tomorrow? Well, that never happens. Okay,
Yes.
well, but in COVID, like not that long
Yeah,
ago, you say,
there was.
now I say, when the grocery store, people may rush to the grocery store and buy a year's worth of toilet paper because they're afraid they're going to run out
Yeah.
of toilet paper. So my point is that we are afraid. We just choose willfully to ignore it at every single step of the way, and we do it at our peril. Why do in terms of I mean, you hear this thing in terms of business all the time. People are afraid, not all the time, but of course, generalizing. You hear this thing that people are afraid of success, which is entirely true, or they're afraid of failing, which is entirely true. They're you people the most common fear is, you get this. This is a really interesting statistic. That the people are so afraid of public speaking that 70% of people, certainly the people in North America, 70% of people, when they go to a funeral, would rather be in the casket than give the eulogy. They'd rather be dead than have to get up there and talk because they're afraid. They're afraid of public speaking. And yet, every time that you open your mouth, you're speaking publicly, like I'm speaking publicly with you. I cannot have a conversation with just one person and not speak publicly. And yet, if there's two or three people in that conversation, people go, I'd rather not talk. So that's a very
You feel
long-winded.
observed.
Yeah,
That's different,
you feel
right?
observed, or you feel judged, or you feel somehow, um, well, maybe judge is the best word, because that covers an entire spectrum of people
Mm-mm-mm-mm.
rating you against this or that. So this that's a long-winded response of saying, yeah, we are afraid. We just willfully choose to ignore it. And I think completely the opposite. I think you have to reach out and completely embrace and acknowledge that you are afraid. Because if you're not afraid, like if you go out and do something very dangerous and you're not afraid, you're a psychopath or a sociopath or potentially both. I don't know anybody who's done extraordinary things who has not been afraid. So I would say, I say this, so you'll have to
So you have
excuse
to
me.
embrace it, basically. That's no way out
Yes,
of it.
there's no way out of it. Like to think to say I'm going to practice doing this until I'm unafraid, then you'll never leave. You'll never leave, because the minute that you run into something you haven't thought of, which is about 5 minutes after you step out the front door, it's a whole new set of circumstances. It's a whole new set of things to be afraid about. So unless you have a mechanism for dealing with being afraid, then it's going to be tough. So I would say this, if you'll excuse the colloquialism, is it's okay to be scared shitless. You just cannot be scared witless. So you cannot be scared out of your mind. You will be afraid, but you just cannot lose it. You still have to have you still have to have your wits about you.
We have to live with it, basically.
Yes, and not just live with it. You have to lean into it. Like, you have to say, okay,
Yeah.
what is it? What is it? Like, what am I afraid of? And let's deal with that. And
Hmm.
I mean, it's not easy, but it wasn't supposed to be easy, right? If it was easy, then, everyone would be on the next to impossible hiking trail.
Absolutely. So you've been sailing across the world, and I
Mhm.
think one experience that was most interested when you were paddling across all Canada.
Yes.
And when you didn't have any river streams, you were basically taking your canoe with you and
Yeah.
just walking, hiking with it. I mean, I cannot
Yeah.
really imagine that.
Yeah. So, um, I went from coast to coast. So I went across the entire continent, which is so it's 7,800 kilometers. So that's 7,800 kilometers by foot or by canoe. And Canada is, I mean, Canada is very much unchanged if you choose to walk across it or paddle across it. So, you know,
It's wild.
wow. And of course I brought no electronic navigation whatsoever. I just brought maps that I had made and a compass and a
Maps
pencil,
in paper or
paper,
wow.
paper maps. So
No
no,
phone,
well,
nothing.
no, I had a small electronic tracker so that people would know where I am if something went seriously wrong. And then I wrote quite a bit, so I was able to take a low resolution picture and then send that back to the shore team and then write something. So I had basically this one way communication with the shore team, but no one could really reach out to me. Um,
Hmm.
but
And
I
how much time was it like to do
six
the whole
about
Canada?
about 6.5 months. So
Wow.
and of course because I wanted to go across the whole country, you can only do that, when winter allows that. So that meant that I was traveling over the mountains in winter. It meant that I was paddling across most of the country in spring and summer, and then I ended up on the East Coast in the fall. So basically,
Wow.
winter and winter at either end of the country. So I'm going as fast as I can. So, and in order to start early enough to do that, you have to start near Vancouver, which is very far south, which means that you have a couple of very long portages. So typically, people think at the portage, you put the canoe on your back and you wander through the bush down the trail and you go back and you get a pack. But some of the places that's the portages that wasn't possible. So the longest portage I did was 238 kilometers. So
All in one.
I pulled the canoe about 1,100 kilometers all told, but the longest of those was over the Continental Divide, basically um, in the tail end of winter, going from one river system to the next. So, if I could have left in a different part of Canada, then the portages weren't necessarily so long, but because where I was, that's just the way it is. So there are some long portages, and that was always the case to get
But the
from coast to coast.
portage, it's like it's a system of doing it, or is it like what is it exactly?
Well, a portage is simply a French word that means carry. So
Okay.
you're literally carrying your stuff from one river or lake to another because you can't paddle. There isn't a river system that goes all across the country. You have to thread a bunch of different things together to do it.
Wow.
So I had a couple of very long portages, and in order to do that, you can't just in this day and age, you know, pound your way through the bush. That would have been impossible. Certainly in a single season, certainly by yourself, it can't be done. But you could do it if you. I had a small cart. I put the canoe in
Hmm.
the cart, loaded up, loaded everything in it, had a special harness, the same sort of harness that you would see people pulling stuff in the Arctic with or the Antarctic, because I've done
Oh.
that. And then I pulled the canoe behind me. So I had two systems. I had one, the system where I would pull the canoe behind me, the loaded canoe. So that's about 200, what is that? Maybe 90 kilos of stuff in the canoe and all the gear. And I'm pulling that down the highway. And then otherwise I'm carrying it. I literally have the canoe on my shoulders and I'm walking through the forest going from one river or one lake to the next. So,
How much
um,
is the canoe weighing?
uh, the canoe weighed about 50 pounds, and the heaviest pack I took was about 75 pounds. So what is that in kilos? 50 pounds is like 225. It's like the canoe weighed like 20 kilos and change, maybe 22 kilos.
Okay.
And no, yeah, that's right. And then the pack weighed about 25 to 30 kilos, the different packs.
Okay.
So
50 kilo basically.
so if you're walking through the forest, So let's say I had to go from one river to the next. And the portage was 1 kilometer long. I had to go across that 1 kilometer stretch 9 times. So if the
Oh.
so if the port because I have to make I had to go there and back. And I had to cut the portage, which means I had to clear it. I had to take all the bush out of it because they're overgrown. Trees have fallen down, so they just don't exist. The path might exist, but the path through is
It's cut.
impossible.
Yeah.
I have to
Mm-hmm.
cut it. So I cut it both ways because you got to walk both ways. And then it's so there and back, there with a pack and back, there with another pack and back, there with another pack and back, and then there with the canoe. So
Whew.
it's 9 times. So every portage, if it's a 500 meters, which is pretty, might be typical, maybe depending, that turns into 4.5 very quick, right? And that's carrying, and it's not just flat; it's up and down and around the rocks, and so so I probably did that. I don't know. I probably did that sort of carrying for maybe 300 kilometers all told. So pulling, and of course so it sounds like a lot, but there's still 6,600 kilometers of paddling, right? So there's still a lot of paddling, but there just happens to be a lot of portaging. So, but
Wow.
yeah, there's stories about that, but yeah.
But I'm wondering now, like, how did you train to be ready for this trip? Because, like, I guess it takes a lot of effort, physical effort.
Oh yeah. Before I decided to do this canoe trip, the last time I was in a canoe was 40 years ago. So I was 20 years 20 I was 25 years old, well 24 years old. But the last time I was in a canoe was 40, literally a few years ago now. So 40, but when I started, it was 40 years ago. So I decided this would be a good thing to do, and I went and got a canoe, and then I paddled it as best I could over the course of winter. But I live in the ocean, so there's no paddling up and down the streams or the lakes. I just, the longest paddle I did for when I was training was about 2 hours. And the first day that I went canoeing on the river, I was there for 8. And then that was probably one of my shortest days. So, and then in terms of carrying the canoe, or portaging, I practiced a little bit pulling the canoe, pulling the canoe on the trailer. And then I remembered the first time I put half a load in the canoe, so not everything I was carrying, but half, and then walked my little. So I would walk pulling the canoe. The longest I did was probably 5 kilometers, maybe 5 or 6 kilometers. And I thought, oh my God, this is next to impossible because that was only half the canoe load. I thought, oh my God, what am I in for? And the first time I put the canoe on the cart and walked on the trip, that was 30 kilometers. So in order for me, and the longest, what I would do for training, I would take a pack, the heaviest pack that I was going to carry, so probably in the order of like 30 kilos, and then I would go for a walk, literally just a walk, and that would be anywhere from basically an hour and 15 minutes to 2 hours. And I did that sort of every other day. So I would walk one day, and the next day I would canoe. But it's impossible. It was impossible for me to train, to paddle a canoe for 12 hours every day nonstop for 6 months. That's just not going to work. So this idea, you have to be, of course, your body will acclimatize to the most extreme things that you can toss at it before you even, almost in a blink of an eye. We're these extraordinary machines. You just
So
have to be meant.
because you can, yeah, also in nature, I guess, like you never have the chance if you have nowhere to go. It's
Yes.
just like you're just doing it because
Yeah.
you have to do it. It's not like I
Yeah.
have to reach a point. There's no
Yeah.
goal.
Yeah. So I remember reading the journals. I read every journal that I could find, of all of Canada's original cartographers and explorers. So, and you would know these names. You would know Vancouver, for example, Captain George Vancouver. You would know, Captain James Cook. You would know his name. You would know William Bligh. You would know his name. Well, they're all contemporaries, and they all mapped on this coast. I've been to the same places that those guys have been, all three of those guys, because they were all up and down the west coast of North America, and of course other places in the world. But they were contemporaries of all the people that were traveling across Canada, and whose literally, foot tracks and canoe wakes I was following in. So that would be Mackenzie, Fraser, Fiddler, Thompson, all these guys. And they were all contemporaries, all using the same technology to map and all that sort of thing. So if you read those guys' journals, they would spend all winter in a cabin that would be literally 8 feet by 10 feet. So let's say 3 meters by 4. And there'd be like 6 guys in this cabin in the middle of the wilderness, existing on berries and bear fat, just this horrible combination. And they'd be there for months doing nothing except chopping wood and trying to keep warm. And then May 1st or May 10th would come around, and they'd get in a canoe or walk, and they'd spend the next 6 months traveling these incredible distances with zero training. None. Zero. It's like you laying in your bed for 6 months, and then someone says, "Oh, look, it's June 1st," and you get up and you walk from Dusseldorf to Berlin. Just because, right? So
you have nothing to do.
yeah. So and they could do it because, one, they knew they could do it. So that's important. They had, and there was nothing driving them except themselves. There's no one looking over their shoulder. It's a really interesting thing, actually, to think about that. There's no one driving them at all. There's no financial incentive to do it, because they're only getting paid with the food they eat, and they can all exist in the bush. So there's something else. There's another driver, right? And basically, we could talk about that too. But the point is, there's zero training at all.
Yeah.
And they were what they had that we don't have is that they were unbelievably tough. They were mentally tough in a way that I certainly can't imagine. And one of the reasons I wanted to do this in a very hard way was to try to understand something about, firstly, their ideas, or was to try to understand something about how tough they were, and what they were facing and what made them that way. And then to understand what the gap, where that gap is between us and them. So Canada would be a completely different country. Well, you could say that most of the world would be a different country if that hadn't been the case. And of course, it sprang up in Europe. Like, these people were all European. So there's something about that that's incredibly important. And then there's something incredibly important about how they managed to do what they managed to do and turn these countries into what they are. And then, again, Canada would be a different country. The world would very well be a different place if it had not been for them. So I wanted to understand something about what drove them and what made them, so I could to get a better perspective, I guess, of where we've come from. It's very difficult to know. Like, if I told you, if I said, okay, you've got to get to Strasbourg. Okay, so you have to get to Strasbourg. Okay. But I don't tell you where you are. I just spin you around and around and around and around and say, okay, go to Strasbourg. You go, where am I? He said, I can't tell you that. It's a secret. You'd never get to Strasbourg, never in a million years, right? You need to know where you are in order to have any idea of how to get to where you want to go. And I believe that in order to know where you are, you need to know something about how you got there. And if you choose to ignore how you got there, you do so at your own peril, because what you've done is completely and totally, one, erase the tremendous contributions that people have given their lives to enable you to be where you are. So you do those people a tremendous disservice. And then you do an even bigger disservice to the people who were exploited, or who were somehow abused, or were somehow taken advantage of to get to where you are. So in Canada, for example, the names that I mentioned. Well, let's take Cook, because everyone can understand about Captain James Cook. So traveling through Polynesia, he had a Polynesian with him, He had
Hmm.
someone who knew the local culture, knew the language, knew everything. It turned out sort of almost happenstance that the people that could speak the language in Tahiti could also be understood, almost could be understood pretty well all across of Polynesia. And the only place that wasn't true was in Australia. So a lot of Cook's successes, of course, are attributed to him, but in no small measure can they be attributed to the people that accompanied him, the indigenous people who accompanied him.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's exactly the same thing here in Canada.
Yeah.
And what's even more interesting in Canada, it was impossible to travel in this country without women. So the people, the names of the people that we know, like Fraser Mackenzie, the list goes on and on and on. They were all accompanied by Indigenous guides. So
Hmm.
their travels and exploits would have been impossible without Indigenous guides. And all the Indigenous guides traveled with their wives, because their wives did all the work, all of it.
Hmm.
The men, the only job the men had was to go out and kill something to eat. That was it. They had two jobs: to provide and protect. That's it. Because that's all men are good for, right? Fighting and eating, right? I mean, and
Yeah.
and the women did everything else. And so, say Thompson, for example, he's probably the world's, no exaggeration, no hyperbole. He's the world's greatest surveyor, bar none. He surveyed just about all of North America, from the Mississippi watershed all the way up to the Mackenzie watershed. And his maps were so good; they were the best maps of that area for easily 100 125 years. He was spent 28 years in the bush, 28 years. He arrived in Canada when he was 13, and then he worked until he was over 60. He actually surveyed most of the Canadian US border, at least the part of the border that was really hard. And he traveled more than 90,000 kilometers by foot and canoe and horseback surveying. And his wife traveled with him for 50,000 of those kilometers. So, and no one knows her name. Well, I do. So, I mean, some
Yeah.
people do. She was Indigenous. They married typically like everyone married back then. They were married for almost 65 years. They have this amazing, beautiful relationship. And if you read his journals and something about his life, you realize the contribution that his wife, and then of course by extension everyone else's wife. So not only was he married for 60 years to an Indigenous woman, but so was Peter Fiddler, his contemporary in the Hudson's Bay Company. So that's a long-winded way of saying that we are here because of the contributions of all these people who live these extraordinary lives, Indigenous people, Indigenous women, and that we don't know who they are. And if we choose to ignore that, we do so at our own peril, because that does not tell us, if we do it, we don't know completely where we are. And that, by definition, will not allow us to get where we want to go, because you have to know where you are and how you got there in order to get to where you go. So
That's
there
pretty
you go.
interesting concept. So
Yes.
this exploration nature that you feel, and you're trying to go a little bit deeper,
Hmm.
doing the same experiences that they did.
Yeah.
Was it something that also pushed you? Because you told me you were in the military when you
Yeah.
were very young. Is
Hmm.
it the same drive that took you there?
Well, a lot of it is by accident. So I ended up in the army by accident because I'm almost completely colorblind, and I didn't
Oh,
know that. I didn't know that
really?
until, yeah, yeah. So in at the time in the army, or then in the Canadian Armed Forces, um, they had a scale. 0 means you can see perfectly in terms of color vision, and 10 means you see black and white. Literally just you black and white. You have no cones at all in your eyes. So the cells that detect color. I'm a 9.
Okay.
I'm a 9.
What?
So I didn't know that. I didn't know that because if you're a kid, the sky is blue and the grass is green. What else you need to know? And where I grew up, there was mostly sky, and it was prairie, so it's flat. It's like the steppes. It is the steppes. It's the equivalent of the steppes in the Ukraine. So you have some perception of what that is. And the prairies in Canada are the same, or Texas. It's nothing that it's flat. It's just literally
Hmm.
as flat as a pancake. And then it's nothing but big sky. So yeah, the sky's blue. So okay, sky's blue. What do I know, right? I usually don't know. So the best way to describe it would be if you went out on a moonlit night. So you go out and it's a full moon. You go out in the middle of night. There's no color anymore. Everything is just simply grayscale, right?
Hmm.
So that's basically my world in terms of color, as best as I can describe it. And so
But wait a second. Like, if someone told you name names of colors of things,
Mhm.
like how would you perceive this? Like, why nobody noticed that before?
Well, because I mean, yes, in the wintertime in where I grew up, so
Hmm.
say 60 years out of the 6 months, 6 years, 6 months out of the year, it's snow. Snow's white. Like that's no
Okay.
problem, right? The sky's blue.
Mm,
So if in order for me to tell, what color it is, I have to have a reference. So if I look at a stop sign, right? The stop sign has a very particular shape. I've always been told that stop signs are red. So I can look around and I can see what shade that stop sign is, because it'll be a shade. It won't be red, as you know it. To me, it's a gray, sort of grayish, funny kind of shade. Then I can
okay.
compare that to everything else in my field of view, and everything else that has that same shade I know is red.
Okay. So it like there is a color. It's just like a different one. It's a shade of gray.
It's a shade of gray. Yeah, it's a shade of gray.
Okay.
Or um, it could be like if I look at the way that your color is presented on the screen, it's basically a couple of shades to me.
Mhm.
So, what you're wearing is almost the same shade as what's in the back in terms of the
Okay.
curtains, whatever. So if someone told me what that color was, because I don't have a
Okay.
reference for it, I could say, oh, okay, then I would compare that to all the other colors. So
Interesting.
I know that this is blue
Okay.
because someone told me that this is blue. So when I walk around, I can compare this, what I'm wearing, to everything else. And if it were obviously the sky is not this color blue, but it's a shade of this
Mm,
color. So
yeah.
I didn't know that. And so when I got to, I wanted to join the Navy because I wanted to be at sea. So I went to military college because that was the only time, that's the only place I could get an undergraduate degree in physics and physical oceanography, because I wanted to go to sea and be a scientist. So, the Navy was going to pay for it and they were going to pay for my postgraduate training. But so I get there, and you in order to get qualified, they give you these color vision tests. I'd never seen them before. And I had no idea. Like people, you get those circles with with all the different colored dots in it, and there's a number or letter in it. Have you seen those?
Yeah, I have done that many
Yeah,
times.
I've seen nothing. I see
Zero.
nothing. It's
Ah,
nothing.
shit.
I see nothing in there. So, I'm failing every one of these tests, and I don't know what's wrong. And of course, and I sent all my friends. I tried to get my friends to go there and memorize the sequence of everything, and that failed. And then there's other ones with blinking lights. I failed everything, right? So they say, okay, Terhart, you can't be in the Navy because you have to be able to differentiate colors. So, okay. So your choices are, you can be in the Army or you can be in the Army. What would you like to do? So,
Why the
so
difference? I don't get it. Why
because in
you
the
can
ar-
be in the.
because in the Army you don't have to be able to discern colors. You just need to be able to carry a rifle, and walk around with a bad attitude. So if you're at
Oh.
sea, for example, imagine if you're a deck officer on a ship. Ships have red and green lights, port and starboard.
Mm-hmm.
If the ship is coming at you, the lights will be one way. If they're going a way, that's a different way. And
Mm,
signal lights are all different. Flags, for
okay.
example, they were signaling, signaling intership with flags, all different colors and shapes. None of that I see. So no, no, no Navy for you. And if you wanted to be an engineer, if you look at a wiring diagram or you look at wires, all the wires are different colors. They could be
Yeah.
yellow, orange, green, red, whatever the case, stripes, who knows. I can't see that. So I can't be the guy in the movie snipping the red wire to stop, to end the world. It's like, don't put
Everybody's
Terhart.
gonna die.
Yeah, don't put him there. He has no clue. So they could say, well, in the art they don't care. Like in the Army, you just dig a hole in the ground, right, and hide in it.
And that's it.
Yeah.
Okay.
So if I was going to be in the Army, I was going to do something fun and hard. So that's how I ended up in the Canadian Special Service Force. So dressed up like a bush, jumping out of an airplane, just scaring people, that sort of thing. So, but again, if I was going to do it, then I was going to do something hard. So that's how I ended up there. So I fell into it, and I fell into all these
Mm,
other things. But whenever I fell into something, I decided I would do something hard.
So
And
it kind of started in this way, and then you started like to like it even more, and
yeah,
then be
just
more adventurous.
you sort of lean into that, just lean into that. So yeah, and it's when I was a kid, my father was my parents are Dutch. Both my parents are Dutch. They immigrated to Canada, and okay, that sounds very doesn't sound maybe sounds so adventuresome, but think about this. My mother was the secretary to the Dutch ambassador to France. She was living in Paris at the time. She
Hmm.
had one of the most prestigious jobs you could get in the Dutch Foreign Service as a woman at the time. She spoke 5 languages fluently, and she wrote fluently in all 5.
Wow.
Curiously enough, she could read them equally as well backwards and forwards. So she could take a she could be sitting on the other side of the desk, and you'd be writing, and she could read what you were writing. So
Ooh,
I'm
that's
not
a good
sure.
skill.
It's a very good skill. So it's like almost like my mom, the spy. So my mom is living in Paris. She worked in Ottawa, Canberra, London, Paris, and then obviously and then Amsterdam. But she was posted to Paris. Her next posting was going to be Peking, again as secretary to the Dutch ambassador to China. And my father had left the Merchant Marine and immigrated to Canada. His job was painting a house. So he left a very prestigious job in Holland, which is a maritime sort of country. He was a first officer in a large cargo ship, so he had done very well as a young man. Left it all behind, came to Canada to paint a house because he thought there was more opportunity there, if you can believe that. Ended up in northern Saskatchewan, ended up near the Arctic
Ooh.
Circle surveying in the bush. So he's surveying. There's pictures of him standing up to his chest in a swamp, and someone is batting flies, mosquitoes and black flies away from him while he's looking through a theodolite. Basically, it's a survey instrument, not that different than a sextant at sea, because he had navigational skills, which translates into surveying skills on land. He saves up all his money for 2 years, flies to Paris, and asks my mom to marry him, and she says yes. So she moves from the the embassy, the Dutch embassy in Paris, to a trailer that my dad had built, basically a 2 meter, 2.5 meter by 3 meter trailer my dad had made out of plywood in the middle of the bush in northern Manitoba. So if that's not adventure, I'm not sure what is. So whenever my dad would give me a hard time, I would always just say, "I'm not sure, Dad. I got it from you." Then he wouldn't say anything anymore. So I think it just that this and my it's the same as my brothers and I have a brother, an older brother, and 2 younger sisters. They both are cut of the same cloth. So I just think it's part of my DNA. It's a long-winded way of me saying it's part of my DNA. I came by it naturally. Now, having
Mhm.
said that, everyone I've talked to, and I'm sure this would be true of you as well, Eleanor, is that your own story, the story of your parents, is every bit as fascinating and interesting and inspiring and motivating as the story of my mom my story of my mom might have been. And that's because we take our own stories for granted completely, because we just live them in our lives. It's like, oh well, what's so special
True.
about that? So
Yeah.
my mom's story is amazing, and then my dad's story is equally amazing. The stories of his friends would just lay me on the floor. And I think it's one of the things that's driven social media to be so unbelievably. It's allowed it to grow. It's just we have this platform to tell our stories in very unique ways, like uniquely personal
Hmm.
ways. And we've come to know that how unbelievable that can garner an incredible amount of traction, which means it can draw a lot of people that end up sticking right to say your story in some way or another. Of course, there's 2 sides to every coin, but the good side of that is that there is a way to amplify. There is a way to, I shouldn't say amplify, it's the wrong word. There is a way to celebrate your story. And I think that it's the way that every business is a success now. This one of the ways that to be successful, we know that as culture, but that's simply telling the story of, like, everyone knows the story of Apple. Like, why is that so powerful? Everyone knows the story of Nike. I mean, for Nike, for the first 20 years, they never. Oh, I shouldn't. Maybe I don't know. That's an exaggeration, but they never advertised shoes. They just advertised the story of what they were in business for. Like, why are you here? And they
It's the
wanted to sell.
lifestyle.
Yeah, well, they wanted to celebrate excellence, right? There's
Hmm.
lifestyle, like
Yeah.
exactly like you mentioned, or there's a way in Nike, for example, they were celebrating excellence. If you look at Rolex, they're celebrating lifestyle. They're saying, okay, this is one of them
Hmm.
things. Lululemon, it's the same thing, but Lululemon is they're trying to tell a story, right? They're not saying we're selling yoga pants because that's not very
Yeah,
exciting, right?
it's the
And
experience basically
yeah,
that you're selling. It's not
hmm
that specific. It's the same, we were talking when I was in China. Remember, we were talking about marketing. We had
hmm
Chinese class, and we were actually doing business topics, economics topics in Chinese. And
hmm
we were taking like case studies. And I think it was Starbucks. And so I've never been to Starbucks in Europe. And then I go to China, and that's the only place where I want to be. Of course, over time, there's also other ones like Costa Coffee and so on
hmm
that are very fancy and nice. But the reason is like, and she was asking me, like, why do you go there? Because eventually, yeah, okay, the coffee may be good. If you're in Asia, you may not have like coffee shops like in Europe, but still, like, what do you actually go? Well, I said, because it's the only place where it's very comfortable to be
hmm
with
yeah.
people, be alone. There's outside, there's a lot of mess. Like literally, sometimes I had headaches for days for the honking of the
hmm
cars. The environment is very noisy. There's a lot of people, and a lot of places are dirty.
hmm Yeah.
So you go there because you want to have a specific experience. You don't
hmm
want specifically the coffee or the toast, which are average, I would say. So definitely, yeah, they're not selling what they're actually selling, with their marketing
So
and the
that
stories.
that's I find that so interesting because if you read his autobiography, the guy who started Starbucks, he was it was going nowhere, right? He was going nowhere, and he went to Italy. He went to Milan, and he
Oh yeah,
realized that he realized the places that the reason people were going there, that it was a third place. It wasn't work, it wasn't home, but it was some other place that was
or to be.
comfortable.
Hmm.
Some other place that was which is exactly the way that you described your experience in China. It wasn't work, it
Yeah,
wasn't home, it was a third place. So he came back and just tried to turn Starbucks into a third place, not home, not work, someplace else where you could relax and be comfortable, and their coffee is average.
yeah.
Uh, and there and for I know that I'm not a coffee drinker, to be honest, but everyone I know that's a coffee drinker, they're not raving about Starbucks, even though Starbucks coffee is expensive. You're not paying
Yeah,
for you're not paying for coffee at Starbucks,
no, it's the
exactly
sofa.
in exactly the way that you described. It's this third place, right? It's
Hmm.
this third place. So if people who are listening to this who might be business minded, if you can identify, if you can take that same context and look at your offer, or look at what you're doing, and view that as some sort of third place, then you would have a leg up that I think would be absolutely transformative. It's not easy, of course. It's difficult to do in every context, but it's worth the exercise, because it'll shed a completely different perspective on what it
Hmm.
is and why you're doing it. I mean, most business people, like, this is okay. This translates. So when people come to me and they say, "Hey, Bert, what kind of sailboat should I get?" I want to buy this boat. I said, well, what do you want to do with it? Well, I just want to tie it up to the dock and entertain all my friends. I said, well, why are you buying a sailboat then? You don't need a sailboat. What you need is something else. Oh no, but I want a sailboat. So they have the cart before the horse. So
The
if I were to,
concept.
so you need to understand what it is that you're doing with that thing in order for you to actually get that thing and get the most use out of that thing. So in
Hmm.
terms of a sailboat, what is it you want to do? I want to sail around the world. Well, then you're not getting a condominium that you can tie up to the dock and have 45 people on board for drinks. Like, that's not going to work. So if you ask most business people, why do your best customers buy from you? Most business, even incredibly successful business owners, have trouble asking that question or answering that question. They don't honestly know why their most valuable customers are buying from them, because in the same way they don't know what kind of sailboat they should buy because they don't actually know what they want to
Mm-hmm.
do with it, or they haven't answered that question. So Starbucks, the guy set out to do that, and he accomplished that, right? Which is how you described it in China, and that, of course, was transformational. It changed the world quite literally.
That's
So.
There's, I think, the way, how a lot of people get stuck into buying gym equipment
Hmm.
or whatever you may use in sport. Like, honestly, like, I do have, I like to buy good sports clothes, but like, I don't buy them so often. The only reason is because they last longer and I
Hmm.
use them, like, I overuse them. But like, if you see me going to the gym, if I compare myself to most women I see coming into the gym, I really have, I don't know, very whatever pants or
Hmm.
t-shirt, and they have like super fancy bras,
Hmm.
and I don't even remember the last time I have a bra since I am 15. Seriously, someone
Hmm.
bought it to me from H&M, and I still have it and I still wear it.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh my god, sometimes I look at those things and yeah, I would like to have it, but it's not like necessary. Like, I'm more focused on doing the work. And
Hmm.
then also, like, if I look what they actually do, I'm actually working out even more.
Hmm.
And it's just like, you get so fixated to the objects that you need to do those things instead of doing the experience
Hmm.
and going through that and doing the mental work
Hmm.
that we were discussing, right? So
Hmm.
I'm also wondering, because you said you went through this very long trip. How did you plan it? Because it's a lot of months and you were
uh,
basically what, without anything. So where did you buy food, for example? Where did you take water?
so are we talking about the canoe trip or one of the sailing trips?
The canoe trip.
Okay, so the canoe trip. So you're gonna laugh. You're gonna find this. I'm smiling because I'm thinking. So that the longest time I had to carry food. So the longest time frame that I thought that I would be without the ability to get food was 30 days. So,
Okay.
so I always carried 30 days of food with me at any one time, even though sometimes I would be able to get food almost every day, depending where I was. So, traveling in like traveling down the St. Lawrence Seaway, for example, that's been populated since the early 1600s, so 1620, 1604 or 5. So people have been living there for a long time. So it's very European. There's lots of little villages along the way, so I was able to get food. But that doesn't mean but the longest distance would have been 30 days without food,
Hmm.
without the ability
Okay.
to find food.
But also
For
the capacity you had. That's why 30 days. Like, you couldn't
well,
get more food, would you?
that's the limit, right? Because
Okay.
30 days of food is about 45 pounds. It's a pound and a half of food a day. And that was as much as I could possibly carry, because there's a limit to what you can carry, of course, and there's a limit to what fits in the canoe, of course, and there's a
Hmm.
limit to the water you can carry. So I never, only time I carried water was when I was around salt water, and then I would only carry 4 liters. So that was 2 days. So it was my ration of
Otherwise, you
water.
would drink
I
from the streams.
Yeah, I had a small filter, and I would just
Okay.
drink right out of the streams. And I drank water that didn't look much different than than the top that you're wearing. It was horrible looking, but I didn't care. Piano people had drank that water before without a filter, so I had a filter so I wouldn't get sick. Which I never I got sick once, but that was drinking unfiltered water. But
Okay.
for the most part, I was fine. So there's a limit to what you carry. So what do I eat? Though first and foremost, I need to carry 30 days of food. So what does that look like? Well, that looks like oatmeal, oatmeal and nuts and dried fruit. I'm perfectly fine eating the same thing every single day,
Hmm.
and I don't care. Where people would find that hard. Like, I'm not a foodie by when it was what we would my brothers cares deeply about food. I could care
Hmm.
less about food, other than I have to have some. So I would eat the same thing every day, and for dinner it would be the same thing pretty much. It would be pasta or maybe quinoa, maybe
I'm
rice.
laughing, you know why? Because foodie is not even a concept in
Yeah,
the Southern Mediterranean. Like I learned this word, like what's a foodie? Like you
yeah,
either you like food. That's it.
yeah, yeah. Okay, so I have to buy food, right? Because it
Mhm.
took me 6.5 months, and I have to buy food along the way. But there's no grocery stores along the way. All there is along the
Mm.
way is the equivalent of a gas station, because in every little place there's a convenience store of some description. So my entire meal plan was designed around what I could get in 7-Eleven. Or if you went into a
Mm.
local gas station and you looked around, I have to buy food for 30 days. What am I going to get in the gas station? So
Gosh.
in a gas station, you can always buy, in a convenience store, you can always buy oatmeal. There's always some kind of cereal. There's
Mm.
always some kind of dried meat. So
Good.
jerky or something. And there's always some kind of bread, right? You can always get a wrap or some bread or something like that. And, usually jam or peanut butter or something like that. So most people are shocked. It's like going in, I guess the equivalent, because we talked about Starbucks. It's like walking into Starbucks and looking, what can I buy here that's going to last me for the next 30 days? So, you get some cookies, right, that you can eat stale and those sorts of things. So my diet was very limited just because of there's no grocery stores. I remember I was sailing up north in the Aleutian Islands, way out at the near Alaska, and of course I arrived there and I asked the village safety officer, because his job is to kill the bears that wander through town.
Okay. The safety
Literally,
officer.
yeah, his job is to. That's what he does. All
Mm.
and because there's anyway. I asked him where the grocery store, where the store is. He goes, well, just keep walking down this road, make a left as soon as you run out of houses, and walk down that street until you see the house with a purple roof, a tin roof. Okay, well,
Okay.
purple. All right, what is that? That's close to the color of the sky. All right, I got that.
Because yeah, obviously
Yeah,
you're color blinded.
no, it doesn't help, right? So I walk there, I find it, I knock on the door, and this lovely woman answers the door, and I said, "Well, I was told by the village safety officer that this is the store." She goes, "Oh yes, yes, just a minute, come in." So I get in the house. She disappears, comes out of the kitchen, and there's a basically a six there's a small table in the living room, and she pulls out like 6 or 7 chocolate bars and lays them on the table, and then looks at me. What would you like? I'm shopping now in the store
Okay.
in Chignik, Alaska. Look it up if you'd like. I'm shopping for food. That's the grocery store. So I've just walked like 2 miles. I just walked basically, what is that? It's like almost 4 kilometers to get there, 3.5 kilometers to get there. I'm not going to leave empty-handed. So I went shopping at the grocery store and I came back with a chocolate bar. That was the way it is. That's the way it is in a lot of these places in the middle of nowhere. The only
And that
they
was
they
all she had?
That's all she had. It was
Oh
near the end of the
gosh.
season, right? It was near the end of the year. Everyone else had bought everything else because people go to the store, and that's all she had left for food was a handful
And
of
you
chocolate bars.
you bought all of them, I
No, no,
guess.
no, no, no,
No.
no. That would just be
Okay.
wrong. I bought one. I bought one.
Why wrong?
Well, because there's other people, right? Who am I to say that that there's other people coming behind me, right? I mean, it would
Mm-hmm.
be I can't imagine that I would buy all the chocolate bars and then no one else, because I could have walked away without the chocolate bar and been perfectly fine. But I mean, I've been hungry enough to to paddle.
Mm-hmm.
I've been hungry enough to paddle all day for something to eat. So all day
But you had
means
nothing,
I had nothing.
right?
I was out of food and out of water.
So you
So
you get there and you just get one chocolate bar and then you leave.
yes, but not. I mean, when I bought this one chocolate bar, you asked me why didn't I buy them all?
Yeah.
Because somebody might come along behind me who needs it way more than I do. So I'm going to buy
Okay.
one. So that means that she has some other ones, maybe for her or for God knows what. But I'm not the most. Like I said, I'm very well aware in those places that there's someone else who might have needs far greater than my own. And I'm an interloper. I'm not local, right? I'm not from there. I'm just visiting. So the last thing I want to do is be that guy who buys all the chocolate bars and leaves, right? And leaves nothing else. So
So
yeah, I bought one.
did you try, like you said, okay, you go to the gas station and you have wraps or you have
Yeah,
oatmeal, whatever. So did you try before to start the trip to go to the short, I don't know, the first gas station you could go and see, okay,
of
I'm
course.
gonna do this. Okay, you did
Yeah.
that planning, right?
Oh yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I knew very well what I was into, and what I was and what I would be up against. And I had done that trip after. Every time I go sailing, the menu is the same, so I know what I can
Mm-hmm.
survive on. I know very well how much I need to eat, depending on how much exercise, how much energy, how much output there is, how much physical activity. So I have some idea of what what I would need to eat. Then I've been in enough convenience stores and gas stations and 7-Elevens and those sorts of things to understand what's there. And then I just said, okay, I'm gonna walk into a couple like you described and have a very hard look at what I can get and what I need. And what you need is very little. Like you say, food is food. And
Mm-hmm.
if you're hungry enough, I guarantee you're going to eat it. I absolutely
Mm-hmm.
guarantee it. And
Yeah.
if you turn your nose up at it, it's because you're not hungry enough.
Yes.
You just you haven't been hungry enough. So and thank God for that. Like, I'm not advocating for people to be hungry by any stretch. It's the cruelest thing I think that we do as a species, actually, is
Mm-hmm.
ignore how important I mean, I don't like to use the word food security, because that's sort of it's in the normal, it's jargon, right? It's not really describing what the problem is. It's a euphemism. It's people who are actually starving, whose people's only concern is what they're going to eat tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been lucky enough to grow up in a society where that isn't a concern. But for about, and not to get on a soapbox, but one of the great things about low energy or low cost energy is that it has enabled billions of people to actually move away to live in something other than complete and utter starvation. So
Yeah.
there's something to be said about that. When you can lift basically a billion people, you can remove the concern of where their next meal is going to be. So that's not something to sneeze at. And when you realize there's probably another 800 million people on the planet who are starving, like literally starving, like I'm starving, I'm going to Starbucks to get a muffin. No, it's a concern, right? It's something that because here in North America, certainly it's out of sight, out of mind. Of course, we have people who are starving and homeless and all those terrible things, but we tend not to focus on that. But this idea of where your next meal is coming from is not something to be taken lightly, which is why I'm not potentially not buying all the chocolate bars. And it's why that
Mm-hmm.
I'm always grateful for something to eat, because there's been times, and it's not of any external circumstance. It's me putting myself into those situations, whether I'm sailing or whether I'm paddling or doing something else, where I'm pretty happy to have something to eat.
Have you hunted anything during this time? Have you
No,
even tried? No,
no,
okay.
no. I mean, I tried fishing, because fishing is pretty simple, but the open ocean is basically a desert. It's very difficult to catch anything. There's nothing there
Mm-hmm.
except, large pelagic fish. And what are you going to do with 100 pound, mahi mahi? Nothing, right? Basically nothing. So, and when you're traveling across the country, like paddling or something like that, I never, there's no requirement for it. Number one, I don't have any particular skill at it too. I had a fishing rod. So fishing is always easy, because it's a relatively, I mean, you can catch fish just about anywhere in those places. So that's not a big deal, but that wasn't a part of my diet. I never relied on it, because that takes time, and you don't
Mm-hmm.
have time, because your days are incredibly long and hard, and you don't just get
Always emotion.
yeah, you don't get to sit around and go, oh, what a lovely sunrise. I think I'll sit here and draw a picture. There's none of that. So uh,
So all this time you were okay, you had no phone or anything. By the way, how did you pay at the gas station? Did you have cash or did you take a bank
a
card,
bank card.
electronic?
Yeah,
Okay,
I
so
had some cash, which I saved for emergency. So that was,
mhm.
but then I always had I had a debit card with me.
But
and
do they
that's
take it in Alaska? I don't know,
oh yeah,
in the small house. Really?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. They'll take that. Yeah, they'll take
Oh
that.
yeah.
I paid cash for the chocolate bar, but that was like $2.
Okay.
Yeah. So that there's some amazing there's some really interesting stories about that. So I'm laughing because I was paying with a debit card. I was in a pretty large town actually in Manitoba, so central Canada, and I just done a done basically the 35 or 38-kilometer portage between, one river system and the next. And uh, I'm in this town, and I'm in a store, and I'm buying. I was buying something to eat again, like something simple, because I'm always looking to carry 30 days of food. I know what I'm running out. And a policeman walks in. I go, okay, this is odd. That you know, anytime there's a policeman walks in to one of these places, I'm sure they're looking for me because I'm the only thing out of the ordinary. And he looks at me
Okay.
and he goes, "Oh, it's you." And I go, "Okay, yeah, it's me. What have I done wrong?" Smiling. He goes, "Well, nothing. We got a report that someone had stolen a canoe and they were walking down the road with it." And
Okay.
so he saw the canoe outside because it was on the trailer, right? I was walking down the highway going from one river system or one lake to the one river system
On the highway.
on the
Okay.
highway. And and he walks in, and I had pulled out of a small dry bag. I'd pulled my little debit card because I'm not carrying a wallet. That's too big. I have a debit card in a dry bag, a little tiny dry bag, roll it out, and I'm handing it. He sees the dry bag, recognizes that only the guy with the dry bag, wearing a funny harness, because I'm wearing, the stuff. And he goes, "Oh, it's you." I say, "Yeah, it's you." He said, "Well, we got a report that someone had stolen a canoe." And I looked at him and I said, "What kind of idiot would steal a canoe and his getaway plan is to walk down the highway with it?" And he started just killing himself because it's hilarious. I started killing himself laughing. I said, "That has to be the worst getaway plan, the worst idea of stealing something I've ever heard of, is to steal it, put it on your back, and then walk down the highway where everyone can look at you and go, 'Oh, look, an idiot walking down the highway with a canoe.'"
But wait a second. Can you enter the highway if you're
Yes,
walking?
yes,
In
yes.
Canada, you can.
Well, there was only one place I couldn't, but
Mm.
everywhere else you can.
Okay, but is it legal?
Yes, it's legal.
Ah, okay.
It's incredibly dangerous, but it's
But is there
legal.
like is there a
No,
way for pedestrians? Okay,
no,
so it's just like, is
no.
there like a place where, for example, in Europe, you have always like another small way where if
Correct.
anything
A shoulder.
happens,
No.
yeah, like
Yeah,
even
we
not.
have we have a small shoulder, right? So
Okay.
if it's a two-lane highway, one there and one coming back, then
Hmm.
there's a small shoulder on either side. So, the pavement
Okay.
doesn't end at the lane. There's this small, but some places you can't walk on the shoulder. It's impossible because in the wintertime, the shoulder is nothing but snow. In the
Oh.
spring, it's nothing but mud and gravel. So you
Hmm.
can't literally pull the canoe down the shoulder. It's impossible. And going across a bridge, there's no shoulder. Some
Oh.
places there's no shoulders, just a rock wall. So I was blown into the rock wall on more than one occasion. So a big truck goes by, right? A big semi trailer goes by, and you have this giant, this 60-mile-an-hour wind, or this 100-kilometer-an-hour wind suddenly just blows into you, and it just blows you up against the side of the rock face. So I have, yeah, it was in some places it was incredibly dangerous. So dangerous, in fact, that I would leave at some crazy hour in the morning when there was no traffic, or the
Hmm.
traffic was very limited. There was places I knew that would be very difficult for me to get through because I was crossing bridge after bridge after bridge after bridge, and
Hmm.
I would wait there on the side of the road waiting for the traffic and the trucks to go, so then I would try to sprint across the bridge, so I wasn't, blocking traffic behind me and all the rest. So I got everywhere. I got stopped by the police all the time.
Yeah,
So
I mean, so first of all, I don't know why someone thought you stole a canoe.
me
And
neither.
that
No
was
idea.
like just very funny. But yeah, I mean, interesting you can actually get, because I think you could, if you would do this in Europe, you would be arrested almost
Yeah,
immediately because
yeah,
it's illegal, right?
it's
What
illegal.
are you doing on the highway with a canoe? It's just
Yeah.
dangerous, so they
So
won't allow you.
it's very odd, right? So what's interesting about that is that if imagine you see a guy or a girl or a guy with a dog, who the dog is, you have see somebody walking down the highway pulling a canoe in some way, shape, or form. Would you not be curious?
Oh yeah.
Would you not be curious enough to stop and ask? Because clearly this, and
Mhm.
I've driven over easily, easily, easily 1.5 million kilometers, because in Canada you drive all the time. Like, to have 200,000, I'm sure it's the same. And I'm old, right? So I've driven a lot. I have never seen anybody walk down the road with a canoe in millions of kilometers of driving. If I ever saw somebody doing it, I would stop and ask them, "What are you doing? This has got," and all those, in the 1,200 kilometers I walked, there was only two people who stopped and asked me what I was doing. Only two, and I passed
I
thousands.
don't think I would stop. Like, if
I
I would
don't.
stop, if I would stop, it's because I would ask, "Do you need help?"
Okay,
Something happened.
that's two. That's those.
But
That's that.
not to ask, "What are you doing?" Like, I would mind my business.
No, I was asked. I had people. I had a couple people who'd heard that I was coming through, because they some of the some of the press preceded me, so they knew that I was coming,
Uh-huh.
because in some way somebody had seen me. They would post it on Facebook. It would get noticed, and then suddenly I'm walking through town and people are going, "Hey, you're that guy," and they stop and talk to me, which I thought was fantastic. I just that would just make my, just because it was interesting to talk to people, and they'd want to know what they're doing. Is they're searching for something in their life that resonates with what you're doing. And
Mhm.
because I am doing something so completely out of the ordinary, they're looking deep within themselves to find something that resonates with something so far out of the ordinary as far as their own life is concerned. So in so doing, it sheds a completely different light on what I'm doing, because they're searching their own autobiography, right, for
Yeah.
something that matches. And there's no way in the world that I could have any idea what that might be. I couldn't possibly imagine that. It's hard enough for me to articulate why I'm doing it. I could hardly articulate why someone else might want to do it, right? So they would be searching for these answers, and I could tell, but obviously by the question. So that was it. It was always fascinating to me, because it would, again, it shed more light on what I was doing and gave me a completely different perspective,
Mhm.
which is what life is all about. Life, in my mind, if I had to, life is about perspectives. If you, so it's a, yeah, we've talked about that, so I won't talk about it anymore. But the broader your perspective, the more balanced your perspective, I think the better a representative you would be of the species in general.
Mhm.
Anyway, I got I got stopped by every police car, every cop car that went by. They'd go by, and I'd start counting: 1,001, 1,002, 3. Then I'd hear the siren, And we talked a bit about clothing, and I spent more money on clothing than anything else, because it's your
Yeah.
last line of defense. I had very good clothing, and in order to afford it, I bought everything on sale. So, and because I
Mhm.
bought everything on sale and I'm colorblind, it's like
Oh my
I'm looking
god.
like I'm this, I'm this, I'm basically this clown show walking down the side of the road, and I had this.
Oh god. Okay, this is I actually wondered, this when you told me that you were colorblinded. And now I have the proof.
Yeah, so yeah, in high school it was interesting, right? Because I had no idea, and I had no idea what I was wearing. I just put stuff on, and my friends, they would always be laughing and shaking their head, and I had no idea why, but it was basically a clown. I was like, anyway. So I had this jacket. I had this, and it was camouflage. So
Mhm.
anytime that you see somebody in camouflage in North America, you think army, and then you think
Mm.
terrorist, and then you think he's going to blow something up. So
Shit.
you don't typically see people walking down the highway pulling a canoe dressed in all camouflage, right? So I know that I'm getting stopped. because I'm wearing this camouflage stuff that I bought on sale, right? Because it's the only thing, it was very expensive. I could afford it. And it's not camouflage like you'd see in a forest. It's camouflage like you're in the Bahamas. So it was this crazy digital bluish kind
Okay.
of ridiculous.
What kind of camouflage is that?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's like,
All right.
I'm sorry, Bert, we can see you, right? That's what they were saying. So, and the questions from the police were always the same. And I just loved it. It was like, what are you doing? And I wouldn't tell them what I was doing completely, because that's how they would just start driving me back to the nearest, town. Say, what are you doing? I said, well, I'm just portaging between, these 2 points. And I would make the points near.
You know,
Yeah. They
it's
go,
very
okay.
normal activity.
So I'm just portaging the canoe. And he goes, okay, because it's perfectly legal. I can do that, right?
Hmm.
So why are you doing it? And you wouldn't say, well, why are you doing it? And you go, jihad. That's the wrong answer, right? So I'm although people, I mean, the word jihad. It doesn't, it means basically you're at war with yourself. I mean, people don't understand what that means. So, which is a good thing. It's always a good thing to be at war with yourself, because that means at least you're introspective, right? So
Hmm.
anyway, so forgive me for using that. It's kind of just a joke, but I don't mean to offend anyone. I mean that sincerely. So I give them the right answer, which is I'm just portaging the canoe, right?
Hmm.
Uh, and and then they'd say, "Is everything okay at home?" And I'd
Okay.
go, "Yes, everything's fine at home." Like they wonder if you're. And the next question was, "Do you have any mental problems we should know about?" So
Yeah, I'm trying to solve them.
it was always I was asked those same 3 questions by every law enforcement officer I was stopped by, and I was stopped in every province I went through, and just about on every major river system. They asked me the same 3 questions: what are you doing? Is everything okay at home? And are you right in the head? Uh, and then I would give them the answer to those sort of things, and I had a little card. And then we have a conversation, and every single one of them ended up signing the canoe. So the canoe that I traveled with is there's
Oh,
300, or there's 300, hundreds of signatures on it, because they thought, firstly, it's interesting. Okay, so this guy isn't crazy. Clearly, at least he does, at least at the surface level, he doesn't seem out of his
yeah.
mind. He can at least put a couple sentences together, so he's articulate, which helps. Like, it actually explain what it is I'm doing. And then I'm always speaking with a smile on, I would be laughing and smiling. So it's one thing to say, what are you doing? It's like, I'm portaging. And, is everything right at home? It's like, yeah, of course. What's your problem with that? Shouldn't it be right at home? Are you right in the head? It's like, are you? So no, so it was, it was always, and of course it's laughing just like you are. It's like, it's completely comical. So, on that point, so I had to cross the Fraser River. So the first major portage I did on land was, well, the first day was like 33, was about 28 kilometers. The next day was 33. And then I started on 190 kilometers over top of this mountain pass. So the first 28 kilometers, I had to cross this river that was a kilometer and a half wide. So the bridge is basically 2 kilometers. It's a mile, and there's no
Hmm.
shoulder. So when I get on the bridge, everybody is stopping because they can't get around me, right? So,
Yeah.
they can't pass me, and so I'm stopping traffic. So I'm sitting there, I'm waiting, and I'm waiting for the traffic to lull. And I know that I'm in trouble when I get on the bridge. I have to get on the bridge. I can't actually cross the river because the river's going too fast. There's no bank. So I got to do this. So it looks like there's an opening. I've been sitting there for like 45 minutes. And then I get on the bridge and I go as fast as I can, which is, you can't run. It's a quick walk. And immediately, within a few minutes, there's cars behind, and there's people honking, and there's all kinds of trouble. Well, not trouble, but people are curious, and they're kind enough, here, certainly in rural parts of Canada, where, they're not shaking their fist at you, where you're going by. It's just, it is
How
what it
how
is.
long was the bridge?
It took me about 20 minutes to get across. So,
Mm, okay. Yeah.
so it's a long time, right? If you're
Hmm.
behind a guy in a canoe, it's a long time, right?
Yes, 20 minutes.
So, so sure enough, I'm just coming down I'm just about, I've only got about 8 minutes left before I get off the bridge, and a cop goes whizzing by on the other side, just tearing by. And I go, he's looking for me, right? Sure enough, I hear him. Behind me, I hear the siren, and by that time, because he has to get her off the bridge, and he's following everyone else. But in the meantime, I've gotten off the bridge. I'm now on the shoulder. People can pass,
Hmm.
and then the cop. I hear him. The siren goes on. I pull over to the shoulder, and he. And this is the first time I've been stopped. Right, it's the first day, other than here on Gabriola where I live, because the cops stopped me here as well. Anyway, so they get out of the car, both guys, and there's a truck behind them. So I know that they're thinking they're gonna impound the canoe, like they're thinking we're gonna take the canoe away and the whole
Ooh,
thing, right? So, and they've got their hands on their guns, which is their
even.
training, right? So it's very serious. Like these guys
Hmm.
are serious, so you can't really be flippant. And he said, okay, well, what are you doing? And I said, I'm really sorry, but I'm simply portaging across the river. I can't get across the river. It's too dangerous. The river's too fast, and I've got to get from that side of the Fraser to this side of the Fraser. So the only way to do it, as you know, this is the only highway. It's the Agassiz Bridge. I'm really sorry. I had to get her. I went as quickly as I could. I tried to make sure there was as little traffic as possible. He goes, okay, well, that's fine. You didn't do anything illegal, which is okay. That's good. I'm glad to know that. Then he says, is everything okay at home? I go, yeah, everything's fine at home. It's all good. Nothing's wrong at home. He said, are you okay? Is there anything? Do you have an issue? Any kind of mental challenge or mental disability that you're dealing with that we should know about? And I go, no, as it might look like I'm crazy, but I'm fine. This is all good. I'm planning to do this. So I pull out a card. I give him the card, and he goes, he looks at me and he says, you made my day. And I go, why? Because I told him, as far as I'm concerned, I've just been a giant pain in the what, because there's traffic behind me. You guys have to drive out here. You do the whole thing. He goes, we get calls all the time from people for all kinds of reasons, and invariably, almost 100% of the time, it's a complete waste of our time, because
Hmm.
there's no reason for us to be there. Somebody is either making it up, or it's a lie, or it's completely trivial, but we have to go and check it out. We got a call from someone on the Agassiz Bridge that said there's a crazy person walking down the bridge with a canoe. And I don't know what he's doing or why he's doing it, but you have to get out here right away, because he's going to kill himself or somebody or someone else. So get out here now. So the cops, he goes, there's no way in the world that we would have ever imagined somebody would be walking across the Agassiz Bridge with a canoe. So we figured this was just one of those crazy calls that we had to go answer for no good reason. And we come across the bridge, and there you are, a crazy person walking across the bridge with a canoe. I said we couldn't be happier. This was actually true. There actually is a crazy person walking across. It's like it's so
Some
he was
action.
so he thought this was just marvelous. It's like, imagine your neighbor calls you and said there's a UFO, there's an alien
Hmm.
spaceship in your backyard. And you go, of course there is, right? Everyone's. I get this call once a week. There's a UFO on the roof or the backyard, but you look out your window and there's a UFO. How happy would you be? So this guy couldn't be happier. So I gave a card. He signs the canoe. His partner signs the canoe. We're going to follow you on social media, the whole thing. What do you need? We can give you an escort, with the lights. And I said, no, that's
Even.
not, no, that's not necessary. I'm trying to draw as little attention to myself as possible. So anyway, that was a
Okay.
typical response.
So you had a lot of exchanges with people, but
Yeah.
did you pass also a lot of time alone?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, not nearly so much as sailing, but certainly I spent a lot of time alone. And that's an interesting thing, actually, because, um, being alone and lonely are two wildly different things. They're not at all, they're related, but they're
Mm-hmm.
almost at opposite ends of the spectrum, even though they're on the same sort of, line, as it were. So I was I'm alone a lot, whether sailing or whatever the case might be, but I'm almost never lonely. And some of the loneliest, and I was shocked by this, some of the loneliest experiences I had were on the canoe trip. So as an example, I'm paddling through Montreal
Mm-hmm.
or Ottawa. There's major cities in Canada with, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people. And I'm the only guy doing this, right? And I'm the only standout. And everywhere I look, people are with their friends or their family or their kids or whatever the case might be, except for me. So suddenly I'm feeling very lonely, which is unusual. So and it was because when you're completely isolated, you're not juxtaposed, you're not compared to anything except a tree. A tree is not lonely, right? So but
That's true.
when you're
Yeah.
suddenly thrust into this environment where everyone is with their friends and families and partners and spouses and wives, and the list goes, and everyone's having a good time together, but not you. You're doing
Mm-hmm.
something else, right? So there's this juxtaposition, this comparison, and that can be very lonely. And I remember, if you ask me what the loneliest thing the loneliest I've ever been is watching a professional hockey game. So it would be the equivalent, I suppose, in Europe of going to see, Ajax, the Dutch team, play,
Mm-hmm.
Bayern Munich, right? There's 100,000 people in the stands. And if you fell out of the stands and landed, on the field, they would just sort of, push you to the sideline and the game would continue. No one really cares, right? So there's this idea of I guess it's this idea of connection, right?
Mm-hmm.
As long as you can be connected in some way, shape, or form, and that the connection can be ethereal. It doesn't have to be physical. But when you're, when you're pushed up, or I guess, bumped up against this lack of connection, and you see it stares you in the face, then I found that to be lonely. So even though, when I was away, paddling for days and days and days, weeks, never a month at a time, but certainly weeks at a time, not seeing anybody, not having any contact at all, I was never lonely. But suddenly, I remember paddling through Montreal, looking at all the people on the shore of the St. Lawrence River, thinking, wow, I'm the only guy here that's, doing this utterly by himself. People might be paddling for, maybe going down the river, floating or kayaking or
Mm-hmm.
surfing, whatever, but they're there with friends, or there's friends on the beach, or someone's coming to get them. So they're not really alone. But then, I know that I'm going
Then
to be
there's me.
then there's me. I know that there's no one there. No one knows who I am. No one knows what I'm doing, which is perfectly fine. No one has to know you. But again, it's just, okay, you're just it's one more degree removed. And then you're going to
Mm-hmm.
you don't know where you're going to sleep that night at all. That's something else that most people, like, if I told you, you have no idea where you're going to lay down, where you're going to sleep tonight, suddenly you go, well, what do you mean?
Anxiety.
Suddenly you feel, what, that's not very good, right? That's not, but
Mm-hmm.
that's all you do is spend the whole 6 months traveling. You have no idea where you're going to sleep. None. And you have
Have
no idea.
you have you started talking to yourself at some point? Like,
Oh,
because I guess like if
yeah.
you don't hear anything in the nature for a long time.
Yeah. You're constantly talking to yourself. I mean, it's one of the, I laugh about this because it's one of the ways to know that someone has been alone for a long time is they jabber. So if
Mm-hmm.
you can, I'm talking way too long. I know that. So, you could actually just, I'm not saying this is probably a flaw. So I try not to speak so much, but I'm, you know,
It's stronger than you.
yeah. I'm not very good at that. So I can work, I can certainly do better at that. So yeah, you talk to yourself, all the time, and
Mm.
this, it's really interesting, actually. Um, this idea of the voice that's inside your head, what actually is that, and what
Mhm.
is it telling you? How does it relate to you? Like, because that's an interesting question. That's a question about conscience. And then how does that conscience sort of manifest itself? Obviously through you, but how does it manifest itself by what you're doing and what you're not doing? How is that then? Because that's a choice, right? What I don't do is also a choice. How is that manifested at large? So that's an interesting question. And if you don't, and obviously that the voice inside, it's a voice inside your head. It's actually talking to you.
Mm-mm.
So imagine that has no outlet. That's a very difficult thing. So when you're by yourself, of course you start talking to stuff, even if it's because you're the only thing that you're bouncing an idea off of. So say you have to make a very difficult decision. Well, people will typically reach out in some way, shape, or form to someone they know or someone they trust or something. But then you start pulling all those things out of your life. What do you bounce the idea off? What if you have to make a difficult decision? Who do you talk to about that? Well, you simply talk to yourself about that.
No, that's interesting. No, but it's really like close also to my experience. I went for a hike recently.
Mhm,
It was just 4 hours. I mean, definitely not comparable to the stretch of time you've been through. Um, but I was surprised because I've never felt lonely, not even 1 second.
mhm,
And some months ago, I did for a very long walk. I think it was like also 4 hours, but it was like in a big park
mhm.
and then it was in the city. And I felt lonely all
Yeah,
the 4 hours.
yeah, yeah. I can
And I thought
completely.
maybe it's just the moment that I was going through, but no, actually it's just maybe because you see other people being
Mhm.
together and you're not.
Yeah.
So that's the voice that what it's telling you. It's basically looking at what you have
Mhm.
around in your environment.
So that's really interesting because that's a very astute observation. That's actually a really valuable and important differentiation, right, between those two experiences, and to be able to be introspective and gather that. I think that's really impressive. The other thing is that the only way to get through, the only way to move forward in life in general. So this is, I'm going to get on a soapbox here a little bit, is that you have to be completely embedded in the moment. So, which is
Hmm.
to say that, and I want to say that because you said that, okay, I only went for 4 hours. It doesn't compare to things that you've done, and I think that's not correct. That's not correct because this idea of going on an adventure, whatever that might be, simply means getting outside your front door. So as a child, I'm sure when you opened the front door and closed it behind you, you were on Mars, you were on the moon, you were flying an airplane, you were going to sail around the world, you were going to be you were Amelia Earhart, you're going to be the first woman to fly an airplane around the world, you're going to be the first, you're going to be. So the list goes on and on and on. As soon as you close the front door, you've taken one step out of the normal box, right? A little outside the box, then you're on this grand adventure, and that gets scrubbed out of us as we grow older. But I think that's incorrect. So this idea of adventure is scale invariant, which means it doesn't matter how big or small. It's the moment that matters, and the moment begins the moment you decide, and you can decide
Hmm.
as soon as you step out the front door. So even the word extraordinary, I mean, people automatically assume that means grandiose. It's the big, it's the large, but the word itself means tiny bit extra,
Yeah.
outside the ordinary. So you just
Hmm.
take, all you have to do is go for a walk. It could be 20 minutes, it could be 4 minutes, it could just be stepping outside and taking a breath and looking at a blade of grass and being completely embedded in the moment. And that's transformative. So the times that I'm when I start describing about feeling lonely, I'm no longer in the moment. I'm thinking outside. I'm projecting outside that moment into an experience in the future, or some experience in the past, or I'm projecting how those other people are perceiving their own moments. Oh, look at that couple over there. Look at the guy playing with his dog. Look at the kids or whatever, right? Look at the friends. Look at the guys having a beer. Like, what am I going to do tonight? I'm going to sit down there and suck some water out of the river, right? But that's not me in the moment, right? That's me
Yeah.
somewhere else. So it's
Hmm.
it's this it's this embedded in the moment, that's the important part, right? And that's really hard to do. It sounds easy, but it's really hard to do, and it's impossible with a cell phone, for example. So why are you carrying a cell phone? Well, that's so someone can call me. Really, right? So you're going to carry that cell phone just in case you can't wait to be interrupted. Oh, someone might text me, right? Oh, again, you cannot wait to be interrupted. Whatever it is you're doing, you're going to. So the cell phone it's one of the, and of course it's, you know we live in that kind of world where we're constantly, our attention is constantly, things are pulling at our attention, left, right, and center all
Hmm.
the time. So to be in the moment is really hard when you have all these other things that are, pulling at your,
Distractions. Hmm.
distractions. So, you know, I'm a firm believer in the adventure begins as soon as you walk out the front door, which is another way of saying that little tiny bit outside the ordinary. So, I mean, look at how people become extraordinary. Think of Ronaldo. Okay, so a soccer player, rather than
Hmm.
as opposed to a Canadian, right? So let me say we forget about the Canadian hockey players. He wasn't born, into the Premier League. He just didn't. Okay, there's Ronaldo. He's okay. There you go. He became extraordinary. He became the Ronaldo that by doing that little tiny bit outside the ordinary every day, more so than any other kid. He practiced longer, harder, faster. He would just remain completely focused in the moment at that time. I'm going to be the best. I'm going to be the best. I'm going to be the best. And that's just not true for him. It's true for anyone, who's a who's a who's a master violinist at the age of 10 or 11 or 12. So of course you have skill. Of course that goes without saying.
Hmm.
But there's all kinds of people, skilled people who lack persistence. There's all kinds of really intelligent people who've never really made it. However you choose to do that. But every single one of them has persisted in that little tiny bit outside the ordinary. It's that they're the ones that are staying longer in practice. They're the ones that are actually diligently doing their homework. They're the ones that are practicing. They're the ones that are every single moment they're choosing to be a little bit extra. And if you choose, and if okay, sort of in my own autobiography say, to paddle across Canada is not hard. You just have to be willing to do this for a very long
Hmm.
time.
Yeah,
But very
it's the
incredibly boring.
grit.
Yeah, this is
It's the
very boring.
grit. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
There's studies from Angela Duckworth that she wrote a book which is called Grit,
Hmm.
and the first predictor of a child to be successful and in whatever he she wants to do is the willingness and the grit to get on the treadmill the
Hmm.
next day again and
Hmm.
again and again and again. That's
Hmm.
exactly how you predict success. No
Hmm.
other way. And once you understand this, it's just like, yeah, maybe today you feel you're nowhere, but it's just you getting that 1% more tomorrow. And
Hmm.
again, another 1%, and so on.
Hmm.
So it is also a perspective that you should stop thinking that you're nowhere
Hmm.
now.
Well,
And
yeah.
also like being present thing, i
Hmm.
i noticed that a lot, because what, like, of course we know we need to be present, we have to be in the moment and so on and so forth, but what it is
Hmm.
actually. And
Exactly.
like I have this, you know, at my age, I have a lot of my generation. There's a lot of people who are single, for example, and have a lot of friends that are always looking for a partner and they cannot find one. And they're like desperate and they just obsess about it. And all sorts of things that go around that. But then what happens is like you're basically thinking only that you will be happy when you will get
Hmm.
the girlfriend, the boyfriend, and
Hmm.
the family and whatever. What if you will think about, okay, actually, I have time now and I'm free to do whatever I want. So why do I not enjoy this right now? And then when that comes along, I will enjoy that.
Hmm.
It's just a perspective thing, that you really have to get into. And it's the same with everything. This is one example I have, but with sport, starting from zero or doing like a great effort as you did,
Hmm.
it just takes the resilience to accept the present moment
Yeah.
and enjoy it.
Yeah. I think that, I mean, I'll say two things about that. First off, I mean, this is more maybe, um, it's a little bit more philosophical. So when I say, if the English word want has two meanings, right?
Mm.
Want means, I want something, which is, I want an ice cream cone. And the other way of looking at it, want is a lack of. I want an ice cream cone. So I seek the lack of an ice cream cone. So you have to be very careful how you ask the universe for things. So if I say, I want a partner, that means you're lacking a partner. And the universe will just give you lots more of that. If you want, that's another way of, that's what want means. It means a lack. So you say, I'm seeking a lack of a partner. I'm seeking a lack of an ice cream cone. So rather than wanting, you should just be grateful, which is what you said. So whenever I'm at sea or wherever I'm paddling, I never say, I want more wind. I want less wind. I want the sun to shine. I want the rain to stop. All I ask is,
Mm.
I'm grateful for what I have. That's it. Thank you for, thank you for the wind that you've given me today. Because you're going to talk to yourself, and if you can't be grateful about what you have, then you probably have nothing to say. So this and exactly the way I'm rephrasing it, but I'm just reiterating what you said, which is to say that you need to be grateful for what you have and careful for what you ask for. So this people, I know from a business perspective, people always say, "Oh, I want to make more money. I want money." So are you sure? Are you sure you want the lack of money in your life? Is that really what you're asking for? Or are you asking for resolution to the problems that you think money can solve?
Yeah.
So if you're hungry, right, money can solve that problem. So do you want money, or do you want, what is it you're
Food.
looking for exactly? So you have to be
Hmm.
it's very, it sounds very simplistic, but you need to be very careful about how you're phrasing what it is you need to be very careful about how you're phrasing what it is you'd like to see in your life and how you see your life unfolding. Because if you're not careful about the words you're using, then you're in essence being careless about the direction in which you're choosing to go. So
Hmm.
let me think again. It goes back to, where am I and where do I want to go? So unless you can be grateful about where you are, then you have no idea of what that future might look like. So as an example, I was writing software for a bunch of chiropractors who came to me with a business idea. I said, okay, that's a good idea. I can write the software to do that. So I did it. And they were going to sell the software. So the beta tested, the software worked. It was great. It was a good idea. And they just couldn't seem to be able to sell it, which is a mindset, right? This is not, so they had all the pieces in place, the people. And I said, okay, at one of our board meetings, what do you want? Do you want problems associated with $10,000 in the bank, or do you want the problems associated with $10 million in the bank? Because you will have problems. There's no getting around it. You'll just have different problems, and the scale will be different. So ask yourself very carefully. I know everyone here wants to make a success of this, but ask yourself what it is. Actually be very careful about, where you're pointing. And one of the things that you need to understand is, do you want the problems associated with $10 million in the bank? And it turns out that everybody in that room wanted the problems associated with $10,000 in the bank and not 10 million. So, okay, that sounds very fluffy, Bert, but okay, look at Elon Musk. You think Elon Musk, would you like to have Elon Musk's problems now? He's got lots of money in the bank. Would you like to have, the equivalent of $100 billion in the bank? Would you like those problems? And I guarantee you, if they're being honest with themselves, most people are going to say no to that, because
Hmm.
they would not bear up under the stress associated with, firstly,
Yeah.
having 10,000 people that you're paying their salaries, right? So,
Or they would say yes and then they would regret it.
oh yeah, they would
Hmm.
crumple under the pressure, right? So,
Hmm.
so this idea of being careful what you ask for. There's a reason why there's that phrase, or that adage in English. It's careful what you ask for, you just might get it. So it's you need to be careful about what you ask for. And
Hmm.
I think that I like the way that you said, you just need to be grateful, because there's tremendous blessings on both sides of the fence, right? The grass is never greener on the other side. But if you choose to ignore everything that's good about where you are, then of course everything on the other side is going to look so much better. But it's not true in any way, shape, or form. Oh,
Yeah, once you don't have it's, this is exactly a typical situation for a third culture kid. which I believe you have been as well, because
Hmm.
if you are from one country and then you live in another, or at least like I have not had that exactly in my childhood, but I did have it after, so I do consider myself a third culture
Hmm.
child. And you I just make an example. You want to eat noodles from in Japan, but then you want to have pizza from Italy, and at
Hmm.
the same time you, I don't know, you want to go on the Rocky Mountains, and you cannot have this in the same place.
Hmm.
That's no way you can get this. So you are
Hmm.
actually everywhere at the same time and nowhere, and it
Hmm.
makes you restless all the
Hmm.
time. So it's and it could be good on one side, but it could also create issues on the other. So you
Yeah.
have to really learn how to balance all those wants and necessities.
Yeah. I think one of the things that makes um, life so much harder now than it was before. Um, Even say 15 years ago is the choices. We have so many more choices,
Yes.
and we as a species we've we've evolved um, in situations. Well, we've evolved uh, in an environment where the choices are very, very limited. There's basically just a handful of them. Like I said, men, what's your job? It's like to provide, protect, provide, protect, provide, protect. And we're not, and our situation has evolved, has changed so dramatically, and that the pace is accelerating that we simply cannot keep up with that. And
Hmm.
you said it just beautifully, because you go someplace and you have all these choices in front of you, right? And the choices, it's a double-edged sword. You take either path. Both of them can potentially lead to destruction, but unless you can step back a little bit, right? And firstly understand why you have all the choices, understand that just because I have them all doesn't mean that I need to take them all. Just because you could doesn't mean that you should, right? Just because I could have bought all the chocolate bars doesn't mean that I should have bought all the chocolate bars. Just because
Hmm.
you can have all these things doesn't mean that you should have all these things. Just because you can consume all these things at once doesn't mean that you should. So we suddenly have all these amazing can choices in front of us. CAN. You can do all these things, but you can't do them all. And my father said to me when I was a kid, he said, oh, not as a kid, later on, he said, you can have anything you want in life. You just have to decide if you're willing to pay the price, which is the equivalent of you can have $10,000 problems or $10 million problems. Which would you like?
The
So you can have,
trade-off. Hmm.
yeah. What do you want? Are you willing to pay the price? And if you're not willing to pay and that's an important question, right? Because it's one thing to say that, I want all these things, or I need, but paying the price is something else entirely. And we live in a society and culture where it is possible to pay virtually any price, and that we never always had that choice, because at least in an evolutionary context, certainly living here in Canada, even 150 years ago, I mean, penicillin was just before it was like 1900 or something like that, not that long ago, where basically if you got a flu, not that long ago. So my grandfather was alive. He was born in 18, I think it was 18, I want to say 1888 or something like that. 18. So my grandfather was born before um, antibiotics. So if you cut yourself and got it and there was an infection, chances are you weren't going to see next week.
Yeah.
And so think about that, right? How crazy that is for us now to think of, you cut your child falls down, skins her knee, and it gets infected, and then he might die.
Yeah.
That isn't anywhere near anyone's consciousness now. But not that long ago, that was a reality. Like literally, only a few years ago, that was a reality, and it's still a reality in some places on this earth today, where those kinds of medicines are unavailable. They're
Hmm.
Yeah, it's
Did
just.
you get sick anytime? As you said, once it happened while you were traveling.
I got sick canoeing once, and I was trying to be careful about not getting sick, but I got sick by I drank some water out of the river. So typically, I never drank anything that wasn't filtered, but I drank some water near a city, near
Mm-hmm.
Montreal, actually near a small town between Montreal and, well, not a small town, but a city between Montreal and Quebec called Trois-Rivières, and I got sick there from drinking the water. So a couple days.
Okay.
So
And
you get
that was the only time,
yeah you
or
get yeah you
okay,
get sick and it's over. Like, you can't get sick, you can't get hurt. You get hurt and it's over.
you have
So
to go.
yeah, you have to. Well, no one can come get you, right? If you get sick
Mm-hmm.
on the boat, no one's coming for you. If
Mm.
you hurt yourself on the boat, no one's coming. Oh,
And what about danger of animals? Because I'm thinking in wild nature, you could get, I don't know,
yeah,
bears or
yeah, yeah.
something like that.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. I had bears come in the tent. I had a bear come in the tent.
Ooh.
So there's lots of animals. So but and if you behave like a human, then the wild animals tend to stay away. But if you behave like something that they like to eat, then chances are they'll be interested in you. So, okay, that sounds interesting enough, but imagine you're a surfer and you're dressed up and you're surfing in south in off of Cape Town, where there's lots of great white sharks. It's very unwise to dress up like a seal and go swimming, because that's what they eat. But when you go
Yeah.
surfing, typically wearing a dark wetsuit. You're thrashing
Hmm.
around the surface and you're about the same size as a seal. So it's not a coincidence that there's more great white shark attacks, say, around, in around Cape Town and South Africa, where there's a lot of great whites and a lot of people surfing who look like seals. Same thing here in California. So if you're in the woods, you do the things that humans do, which is you make a lot of noise, you sing songs, you clutter and clumsy around. If you see a bear, for example, the first thing, you're not any wild animals, you're not supposed to turn around and run away, because that's what every prey animal does, right?
Hmm.
Every prey animal. It's why a dog will chase a car. So there's a dog here, and there's a car. The car comes, the dog barks, 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 and as soon as the car goes past, the dog starts running after the car. It's because
Okay.
the car is now behaving like something the dog can chase, like a rabbit.
Hmm.
So there's no running away from a bear. There's no running away from a mountain lion. There's just
Oh,
there's no running
I've seen
away.
a mountain lion, a video just like I think 1 month ago, um, around Calgary. It just came into the house, not inside the house, but outside, and there
Mhm,
was like this woman was inside, and the mountain lion was just out of the window, just killed the cat, the
mhm.
poor cat, and it is big. And I don't know what I would do because, like, honestly, it means like they're just roaming around.
Yeah, mountain lions tend to be very shy. I've only ever seen one in my life in the wild. I've seen some tracks, but they're very shy. But they're
Mm.
around. But if you start,
But would they attack you?
there have been lots of people who have been attacked by mountain lions, but it's typically because you've come across a mother and her kittens,
Hmm.
or you've wandered into a territory that you shouldn't be in, like a place where one of them is actively hunting, or you've surprised one. So the worst thing that
Hmm.
you can do in the bush, for example, certainly if there's bears around, is walk along the riverbank where there's a lot of brush, like alder brush, that's like 6 or 7 feet high. So they can't see you, and they can't really hear you, because the sound, and it's very difficult to differentiate where that sound
Mm.
might be coming from. And bears like to sleep in that sort of stuff, so you can stumble upon a sleeping bear, and none of that is good. So you avoid those things. So the there's lots of people who are attacked by bears, very sadly, and typically, depending on the species, they've been surprised, or that bear has it's a mother with its cubs, or
Hmm.
you've come across a bear who can no longer compete for food. So it's typically an older male who is being pushed out of places where they would normally feed by younger males or females. So, for example, here in Canada, during the fall, some rivers are full of salmon, and the bears
Hmm.
come out of the forest and the mountains, and they just gorge themselves on salmon. So I've been on a river fishing with my brother, surrounded by 11 bears. They're all fishing. They're all fishing. They don't care that we're there because we're not a food item, right? We're behaving like humans, and every other bear is there fishing.
How far were they?
Well, a big male walked past my brother. He could have punched it in the nose on because he's walking on the riverbank.
And
So
you just like stay there
yeah,
still?
I mean, yeah, because you start running away, the bear thinks, well, I wonder what that is. So
Yeah, of
you stand
course.
there and you look and you make yourself big, and the bear is not interested in you. If the bear were interested in you, you'd already be dead. He would have snuck up on you, right? The bears are there to eat fish. So what's easier to eat? Think of this very simplistically. What's easier to eat? A bunch of fish that are like literally all the bear has to do is do this in the water, and out come 4 salmon. And he throws them up on the beach and starts eating them. He's just gorging. It takes
That
one
easy
bite.
for them?
Yeah,
There's so
because well,
many.
because there's so many. Literally, you're just
Hmm.
they're just so many, and they pool up in certain places, right? So there's so many, and the bear will take one bite out of the salmon and leave the rest. He'll just bite, typically the fattiest part of the salmon, which is its stomach, and he'll leave the
Hmm.
rest for the seagulls and everything else. So they'll
Okay.
throw a bunch on the beach and take one bite and just go back. So it's way easier to kill a salmon than it is to potentially kill something that's the size of him that's going to fight back. So
Okay.
and if a wild animal gets hurt, gets cut, gets infected, and
Yeah.
dies, or gets hurt, it can't eat, it's dead. So they're all incredibly cautious, and they're very cautious until they have to fight. And wild animals fight for their life. There's not this sort of, I'm going to do
Hmm.
this and we're going to yell at each other. I mean, there's some of that, of course, when bears are trying to bull or males are trying to bully each other for their rights to mate. But typically, if you corner a wild animal, even a mouse, like why are you afraid of a mouse? Because you corner a mouse, it's going to turn around and bite you. It's going to fight because it knows that, well, the chances of it surviving are probably nil between, a giant human and a little mouse. So it's going to fight to the death. But you're
Hmm.
not prepared to fight the mouse until you die, right? So you turn around and run away from the mouse, which is true, right? I mean, you're laughing. I'm the same. I see a mouse and I try to get it out of the house and trying to, and it's because the cat brought it in, and here I am doing everything possible not to get hurt by this mouse. So anyway,
So,
so the
but
bear's
you
not
had
interested
a
in you.
yeah, but you had a bear coming into your tent, you said.
Correct. Yeah. So
And
it
what
it
happened?
it just clawed its way into the tent and then tried to drag my pack out because the pack had all
The food.
the food in it. The food is all
Hmm.
in in like the bear. The bear knows what I ate for dinner last night just by just what I'm exhaling, right?
Hmm.
So the bear, and I had all the food was in a bear proof bag, was in special bags
A
that don't.
bear-proof bag. Okay.
Yeah, bear
What
proof
is
bag.
that?
These bags are made by a company out of California, so they're Kevlar, and the
Okay.
rope that closes them it's Dyneema. So
Ooh.
it's impossible for the bear to claw it open, to bite it open, or to tear it open. It's impossible. The stuff is made out of the same thing that bulletproof vests are made out of.
Yeah.
And you tie it to a tree. You tie it so that it's completely closed, and you tie it to a tree that the bear can't tear down.
Hmm.
So he can't bite into it and he can't tear it. So I mean, a bear can get into almost anything. Can get into a metal container. A bear can get into your car. Here
Hmm.
in California, for example, in Yosemite Park, where there's lots of people and lots of bears have learned to get their claws into the door frame of a car, because there's the car and there's the
Yeah.
door, and they get their claws in behind there and they just pull down and it just bends the whole window open and shatters it, and then they just crawl in and go into the back seat and pull out what's there. So they've learned to get into a car by just
Yeah.
yanking literally tearing, and you can put it in the trunk. They can't do that yet, but so you're not allowed to put
They
food
can
into
do
the.
that yet.
Yeah, yet. So that you're not allowed to put food into the back seat of a car in Yosemite. It's a national park in the States in California. It's got to be in the trunk.
Hmm.
But if you put that same food into a trunk, a metal trunk, and a polar bear came along, he'd eat his way into the trunk. They would just, they're so big and so strong and so hungry and so determined, they would just tear the thing to bits. to get into it, and even if it took them a week, because that's might be the only thing they're going to eat. So
But
the
they can
bear,
still smell it into this Kevlar bear-proof bag.
there's nothing, there, even though the food is in these odor-proof bags, these special heavy-duty bags where the odor is not supposed to emulate them. But I have eaten something and washed my hands, but it's still me, and I've closed the
Yeah.
bag, so it's impossible for the bear not to. He's just interested, right? Because you're different. The thing that draws him to you and your campsite is the fact that you shouldn't be there, and you might be food. Like, you're interesting to him, right? Their animals are
Hmm.
incredibly curious. They just want to know what's there. Just like if let's say in your own apartment building or your own house, you walk into your house or whatever it is every single day, everything is the same. And one day you walk in there and then the couch is moved around backwards. You go, wait a second. Why is the couch moved around backwards? You'd be curious, right? You wouldn't go, oh, the couch is
Hmm.
backwards. So what? Like, you go, no, you'd stop and, go poking around. So I noticed this at sea, for example. If I wanted company at sea in the middle of nowhere, and the only company I could get was an albatross, those giant birds that spend their whole life at sea practically. All I had to do was take a piece of toilet paper and throw it in the ocean, because
Okay.
toilet paper doesn't normally land in the
Exist.
ocean.
Yeah.
So um, I would, I'd ball up a piece of toilet paper, I'd chuck it in the ocean. And because it's wildly different than everything else that it's there, and these birds have spent millions of years, they've evolved over millions of years to be able to recognize what shouldn't be there and to investigate that, because maybe it's something to eat. That
Wow.
within no time at all, and if I was becalmed, if I was boat was moving slowly, this would happen in minutes. It would take minutes for me to have a bunch of albatross come around and just be curious. So bears were just curious, and there's nothing, you can't stop that. You can't. So I had no compunction about necessarily having, certainly with black bears around, having having my pack near where I was sleeping in the tent. So the bear just
Hmm.
decided he was interested in the pack and that he needed it more than I did. So he came tearing into the tent and tried to make off with it, with
And
me
what
in the
did
tent.
you do?
I yelled, did the only thing that you're supposed to do. So we talked about what if and when if. So I had a when if plan for the bear, because I've had when if plans for bears, for a long time. So the
So you
idea,
thought about it
oh yeah,
beforehand.
yeah, I knew what I would do if that situation happened. And the only thing you can do is yell, right? So but you don't know beforehand if you're going to yell like this and nothing comes out, because that certainly can happen, or if you yell and something comes out. So I was gambling that I would yell and something would came out. So when I started yelling, Captain Bert Terhart came out, the parade, so my very loud, army voice came out, and the bear went scampering away, luckily. So
So the fight, flight, or freeze response, you have to try it out to make sure how you're gonna react, basically, and then it worked out. So next time you encounter a bear, you know you can scream.
I could at least do that. Like,
Okay.
it's a mistake. It's a mistake to think that you will rise to the occasion. That's not true at
Mm,
all. You
yes,
you will only you'll sink to the level of your training or the level of your preparation.
correct.
So if
Yeah, but how
you
can you train seeing a bear? That's the problem.
no, but you can certainly train yelling, right? You can say, well, I wonder what the loudest noises I can make, or you can bring something in the tent with you that can make a very loud noise. So I had a
Mm-hmm.
whistle. It's called a Fox 40. It's a very, very loud whistle.
Mm-hmm.
I had all kinds of noisemakers that I practiced with. Like, can I make a noise with this thing? There's things that you could get with, I had air horns, right? There's people
Mm-hmm.
take these air horns and think the bear comes in the tent and they're gonna scamper, they're gonna sort of feel around in the dark, grab the air horn and press the button. So I know people who've done all that and press the button and nothing comes out because there's no air in the thing anymore. So you better have that might be plan A, but there better be a plan B. So I had an air horn. I had an air horn that makes a very loud noise, but that wasn't plan A. That was plan like D. So in the
Mm-hmm.
tent, I have a knife, like I'm sleeping with a knife, and I'm sleeping with the thing that makes all that noise. But so there's plan A, B, and C. So, and I carried bear spray, I carried bear bangers, I carried all the things. I didn't carry a gun, but I carried all the things. I carried a flare gun because that's perfectly legal. So I figured in the worst case, I could, I could, if I was being, well, I hate to say stalked, but if there was a bear that was too close for comfort, then I had a flare gun,
Hmm.
which I could shoot at the bear, which is in essence what you're, if you're carrying a gun when there are bears around, one of the things that you can carry is a flare basically, and you shoot this
But what
very
is a flare gun? What's the difference from a normal
flare
gun?
gun you have on a boat. It's basically a plastic pistol that shoots a shotgun shell that fires up into the air and then it
Okay.
explodes and goes,
Ah, okay.
with
Yes, yes, yes.
with a
For the
great big,
animals.
yeah,
Hmm.
so with a great big light. So you basically fire this thing just above the bear's head, makes a big sound, and then it explodes with a big, makes a loud sound and a big flash of light, and the bear runs away. Almost invariably, the bear will run away. And if the bear
Hmm.
doesn't run away, then you have a serious problem because he's not behaving like a normal bear.
Yeah.
He's behaving like a hungry bear. Then you have a then you better have another plan besides you have the normal bear plan and then you have the hungry bear plan. So,
Oh gosh. So,
um,
what was, let's wrap it up. What was the biggest lesson you took from this trip that you said, wow, if I didn't do this trip, I would have not understood this of myself, of, I don't know, the world, my life?
well, I think I'm a well, let me give you two answers to that. I think they're on the same thing. So I'm not fudging by giving you because I think both these things are the same or are relatively the same. So um, and they're related because basically I'm a technical sort of guy. So this the whole thing about navigating, because that's math problem. Formally trained as an oceanographer and math guy, so that's again technical stuff. Most of my adult life, I've been a programmer of some description. So I had this very techno centric worldview, and I just almost dismissed everything else. And yet, there was a specific moment when I was at sea when that whole world shifted, that worldview shifted in like a couple of heartbeats, and it made me realize how wildly wrong I had been about that one particular worldview, and basically hanging my proverbial hat on that one particular perspective, even though it had served me incredibly well, even though it was not incorrect, because you can define the world mathematically and get to know a great deal about the world. It's one of the reasons why we live in this society is that, you know, post-Newtonian or post-Newtonian physics, or post-Newton, I should say, and the Enlightenment era allowed us to mathematically describe the world in a very unbelievably complete and complex way. But that's not everything. Like, it's not even half of it. It may only be just a little tiny bit of that, depending on, even though it's incredibly useful. So there's a time at sea when that whole worldview shifted, and I realized that there's another perspective that's equally valid, that gives you a potentially far deeper insight. So that has to do with, I would describe that as more a romantic view, and that idea of a romantic view, it made me realize again, you know, as it changed me. I hate to say, cynic, but if I was being perfectly honest, um, I realized that the core people, I realized how good humanity can actually be, and how wonderful it is to be part of this giant experiment. So, and I say that because when I was every time whenever I went away and didn't realize this. So, and I had no intention. I wanted to leave the dock. When I left, there was only one person on the dock, and I only wanted one person on the dock when I got back. So I didn't do this. I didn't do any of these things for notoriety in any way, shape, or form at all. And then, and I came to realize that the people that were suddenly drawn to these things, they wished me success in every way, shape, and form. They wanted to see me succeed. They genuinely, sincerely were completely and utterly invested in my own venture. I won't call it an adventure because I think that's there's a label that sort of goes with that. So adventure could be anything that you want to do. And these
Hmm.
people could there was thousands of them, tens of thousands of people. They could all fall out of the sky at once, and I would never have recognized a single one of them. But every single one of them was genuinely invested in seeing me succeed. However, I decided or determined that success should look like. So that says something. It doesn't say anything about me. It says something about humanity. And I had no idea, none whatsoever, that there'd be this outpouring of concern and genuine concern and love for
Hmm.
me for no good reason. Like I'm not saying I deserved it in any way, shape, or form. I'm just this crazy person in a small boat or in a canoe, doing something that no one can make any sense of.
They
And
also
yet
don't know you personally,
they
so
haven't exactly. They
right.
don't know me, but they were unbelievably everyone unbelievably supportive in just and genuinely. It's not not your best friend saying, oh, hey Bert, you got this, you can do it. That's almost meaningless, right? But and that was mind it's mind numbing. Actually, it still is. I'm still shocked by it. I still don't completely understand it at all or grasp it, but it says something very profound about the world we live in, and I'm unbelievably grateful for it. And I'm I guess I think the most beautiful thing about it is it's a mystery, and thank God for that. I mean, how boring would your life be if there was no mysteries? If there was no miracles in your life, how boring would it be? How boring would that be?
Yeah, everything is predictable. Then basically, what am I
Yeah.
doing, right?
What are you doing? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
It is something you fear, what you don't know, something that it's not predictable. But this is the human nature
Yeah.
of
That's
living.
that's the thing that you have to lean into, right? There's no getting away from it. There's absolutely no getting away from it. What animal? There's D.H. Lawrence has one of my favorite quotes. It's like it goes like this. It says, I never saw a wild thing sorry for itself. A small bird will drop frozen dead from a bough without ever having felt sorry for itself." So which wild bird or animal do you think is owed anything?
Well, no, of course, but we have a conscience, right? That's what distinguishes us from other wild
Sure,
animals.
sure, but they thank God for a conscience. They're My point is that they they live their lives in what we would consider to be this. They're swimming in a sea of abject terror because every moment could be their last. Right, everything is either going
Hmm.
to eat something or be eaten,
True.
and that doesn't stop them from doing all the things that they love to do. They still live, love, and thrive.
But that's exactly what happens when someone has like a death sentence. The doctor tells you you have 2 months and then you die of cancer, for example. And then everything changes. Your
Yeah.
perspective changes completely because now you're running out of time and
Who
you
who
are working.
So here's what I tell people, and I don't say this very often. I don't say tell people, that's wrong. I'm careful when I say this, is that you're already dead. And people say, why are you doing this, Bert? I say, well, I'm already dead because I've already gotten the thing from the doctor that says you're going to die. He just hasn't. I haven't
We
met
are
the
born
doctor
to
yet.
die. Yeah,
Yeah,
but
that's the minute we're born,
yeah.
we're dying. Like the
Hmm.
minute. There's no getting around it. So why are you waiting for the doctor to come tell you that the time is running out? Why? Like you're
Yeah, but,
laughing.
but but
Like
but but because we don't have the fear of not like most of us going hungry, we don't have the fear of losing our life
I
like to be eaten from an animal. Like all those very basic
no
things that
no
we
there
we.
We're willfully ignoring every single one of them. Like my mother would say, the veneer of civilization is skin deep. So
So
think
you're
of what
saying that the threats are there. We're
yeah,
just not aware of them.
yeah, we willfully ignore them. It's willful ignorance. It's just we absolutely choose to ignore it. And it's not because we're not afraid, it's because we're so very afraid we won't even look in that direction. It's the exact opposite.
Hmm.
So it's like saying, it's like if you said to me, "Hey Bert, there's a tiger behind you." And I go, "I'm not looking."
I don't
So
want to look.
it's like the ostrich who sticks his head in the sand. Everyone knows that an ostrich sticking his head in the sand is just ignoring it. So why does the ostrich stick his
Yeah.
head in the sand? He doesn't see it, therefore it doesn't exist. So we willfully choose to ignore it. The fact that it's there, and it's there in ways that we cannot even hope to imagine. Like here in Canada, the food resources are we have we have 5 days worth of food in the food chain. So
5 days
if
worth of food. What do you
5 days
mean?
food. So if the transportation system stopped tomorrow,
Huh. Huh.
we'd be out of food in 5 days
Five
everywhere
days.
everywhere in the country. And nobody, there's only maybe one in 500,000 people who can live off the land. So suddenly within 5 days, and nobody has in their house water to last them 4 months or food to last them 4 months, it would be over. Like what happens, imagine that all the gas stations stop pumping gas, because that's happened here in North America. We have in the 70s, we had gas shortages that resulted
Hmm.
in lineups that were like 5, 6, 7 hours long. So suddenly it stops pumping gas. But you don't think so. Here I live on a small
We take it
to
for
give you,
granted.
we
We take it
choose
for
to ignore
granted.
it.
Yeah.
We everyone knows that we should have, we live in here in Canada. To drive around in the wintertime is a death defying feat, because the only thing that's keeping you alive is that little car. The number of people that have in their car the ability to survive, say 12 hours in the middle of winter when the car can't run or the highways are closed is a very tiny fraction of them, because you need to have a blanket, a candle, and a little bit of food. Otherwise, if the car stops, then you're done. So last time I drove across Canada in 20, not 1900, but in 2023, I was stopped in the middle, which is like being stopped in the Ukraine in the middle of winter. So this is January, for 18 hours on the highway, because the highways were closed because of a giant ice storm and then an accident. And there's only one highway, so there's not a choice to get off on some other highway. So how many of the people, and I was for 18 hours now. So it's like being stuck outside because the car gets cold almost immediately. You can't run it indefinitely because then you'll
Yeah.
potentially, and unless you're prepared for that, then chances are you have a real issue. And there were people who weren't prepared who were having real issues. So my point is that we just choose to ignore it. And to here, I live on a small island. I live on a little island called Gabriola. There's 4,000 people and there's one grocery store. Do you know what the do you know what the emergency response is if something goes wildly wrong here on Gabriola? The one cop who There's one policeman who's in charge of the island. His job is to drive his car to the front of the grocery store and stand there with a gun to
Whew.
stop people from firstly killing each other, and then, well, firstly ransacking the grocery store, and secondly killing each other when the groceries run out. That's his
Yeah.
job. Here, that's his job. So they're not ignoring what's going on. Everyone else is.
Hmm.
So that's his job. His job is to mount an armed response in front of the grocery store to prevent a riot and then potentially fatal consequences. Now that sounds ridiculous, right? But that wasn't
But
that
he's
long ago.
alone. Like, how is he supposed to do that alone?
Well, he's got a gun, and he's willing to use it. So I guarantee you, I mean, from an army perspective, well, I mean, it would sound terribly morbid, but so we won't go there. But he's got a gun and he's prepared to use it. So draw whatever conclusion you want from that. And if I can tell you that if you're running into the grocery store and the guy beside you gets shot dead, you're going to think twice about running into the grocery store, because most of us are
Mm.
deathly afraid we're going to turn around and run away. So we'd rather
True.
be alive, right? We'd rather be alive and hungry than dead. So, I mean, not to put too fine a point on it, but I mean, that sounds crazy. But in COVID, that's exactly what happened. How many riots were
Hmm.
there? I remember being in California for the Northridge earthquake in 1991, and so there's an earthquake. An earthquake happened, like 7.2 or 7.3 earthquake. There's five major arterial highways that go into the LA basin. All five freeways collapsed, so that immediately means that the entire city is cut off. So suddenly there's no more food, and every grocery store was ransacked within 2 hours. Within 6 hours, there wasn't anything left that you would recognize as a store where you could get food, because people just went berserk, like
Hmm.
immediately berserk. And there's nothing you can do about it. Like there's way more people than there are policemen, even though some of them, and they just couldn't get there quick enough, right? And no one expected
Hmm.
it to happen. Well, my parents saw that in Europe. My mother knew that. My father knew that, and um, I saw it firsthand in California. I was at sea during COVID, actually, so I wasn't here, but I know what was going on. I know sort of the aftermath. So this idea that we're not afraid is we're just willfully not looking um, at all, and
Hmm.
pretending. So.
Yeah, that's true. I've been hearing something. So I didn't do enough research for stating that I believe 100%, but I understand the danger.
Hmm.
There's a bunch of people talking about the electrical grid system,
Hmm.
that we have solar storms every once in a while.
Hmm.
And it happened in the past, and it will happen again. So there's like, for sure it's going to happen. The question is more like, nowadays we're relying so much on electricity that if it happens today compared to 100, 200 years ago, the consequences are catastrophic.
Hmm.
So the thing is, the grid system, it's very outdated, and nobody's actually caring about doing the necessary updates, and nobody's talking about it. So if this by any chance will happen, it means like it could, let's say, have off continent blackout, complete
Hmm.
blackout. And if you would try to speak with people about it, they may not even be that concerned, because there's always the idea there's someone else is taking care of it.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
like, who I am to think about the electrical grids, like I'm not even in the business of doing this kind of stuff, right? So it's, I think, maybe it could connect to the positivity that you felt after your trip, that people would be like projecting that no, it's not going to happen,
Hmm.
it's going to be okay, everything's going to be all right, someone else is going to take care of it, but never really questioning, is really someone taking care of it, and let's
Hmm.
look into it.
Hmm. Well,
And
I think you've made a very important point, and there's a fundamental difference between sounding good and doing good. It's very easy to sound good. It's very hard to do good. So remember, I said there's a moral imperative, obviously, to do the harder thing. The harder thing is always
yeah.
the way to go. So it's very easy to sound good, but it's very hard to do good. And you know, doing good comes at great risk. Like you do so at great peril, because there's always risk and reward. It's fundamental. You cannot be expected. You cannot expect rewards to pile on top of you from the heights of heaven if you've not risked anything. Like
Yes.
nothing works that way. So in order to do good, and the grid is a really good example. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with Lahaina, the fire that was in Lahaina, that devastated that community on the island of Maui, in the state of Hawaii, the United States. That was entirely because of a failure in the grid, a
Mm.
failure, or a failure that had happened before, like you've described as solar flares, was completely avoidable because they knew how to fix it, and they chose not to do it. because it
Yeah.
sounds good to say we've got to fix the grid. It's way harder to do good because it's expensive, right? Someone's got to
Yes.
pay for it. Someone has to do the unpopular thing and say we have to get this, and that means it has to be a higher priority than something else. And it's
Yes.
always easy when your only goal is to sound good, is to deprioritize the things that are hard and expensive and require sacrifice. But they can't you do so at your own peril. And I mean, we're talking in very, and I'm a firm, well, we haven't really talked about this, but we're talking in very grand scales. But let's say that you and I are having a disagreement, right? Now, it sounds good to say, hey, we should talk about it. That's easy, right? That sounds good. It's way harder to sit down and say, we're going to talk about this now. This is, and you sit down and say, hey, Ellen, hey, Bert, you're really pissing me off about this, whatever, however you want to phrase it. That's way harder than saying, hey, we should talk about this tonight. And then it'll be, we should
Mhm.
talk about it tomorrow morning or when you get back from work, right? So you can, and imagine, and it gets, you can, no matter, it's scale invariant. You can take this to any scale you want. You can talk about the electrical grid, or you can talk about talking with your partner or your kid or your friend, or you can talk about, you say, someone has cut you off, you're pulling into the grocery store and some guy flies into your parking spot. You have two choices, right? You can get out of the car yelling and screaming and shaking your fist, or you can say maybe there's something driving him today that would cause him to behave like
Understanding.
that, and go,
Hmm.
okay, well, it's neither here nor there. No one's going to die today because he's in a parking spot that I wanted, right? So I can do something else. Which I'm not saying that, it wouldn't, I'm not saying that maybe that person needs to talk and should be held accountable. What I'm saying is that the harder thing sometimes is to walk away from that, because you have this war within yourself, this particular, battle that says, I need to tell that guy.
Hmm.
You see that on social media all the time. The people have their camera, they're taking they're taking a picture of themselves barking at someone else. Now, why is that? Is it because they want it? Are they doing it because they want someone else to see how virtuous they are, or are they doing it for some other reason? So I can't answer that, but I'm skeptical that they're doing it for good reasons when they're filming themselves doing it and then posting it online saying, look at me tell this person off, what a jerk they are. It's like, oh, wait a second, I'm confused as to who the actual jerk is here.
True. So you've been talking. You wrote about those things in your book. What's the name?
Well, there's four. Um, there's
Four.
Yeah,
Okay.
four. So there's 265 days and counting, a voyage around the world. That's the book about the thing. The other one is 90 feet of waterfront. That's basically a coffee table book. So it's all the images, because the boat was 45 feet long. So if I go up one
Hmm.
side, that's 45, and down the other, that's another 45. So I've got 90 feet of waterfront, which, forgive me. I thought that was clever. The the other one is um, a trip across Canada uh, on foot and by canoe. So that's about the trip across Canada. And the other book is a children's book. It's called Sir Salty Goes to Sea. So Salty
Mm.
is it was a stuffed animal that I talked to. So when I
You
was
took it with
alone at sea.
you, or
Yeah, it was given to me at the last minute by this guy who I truly truly admired. Um, so he was a giant. The guy's 6'7", so he's a giant of a man. He was very wealthy, very rich. This guy, and in his lifetime owned 38 boats, all power boats, and this little stuffed animal, a seal, has been on every single one of them. So I knew the
oh,
story, and he didn't have a name for it. It was just his thing. So when I went away, the day that I left here, Gabriola, and headed down to Victoria, where I would eventually leave from, he came striding down the dock and said, "I want you to have this," and I wouldn't take it because I knew that it meant something, and I didn't want the responsibility of I didn't want to be responsible for the
for
safekeeping
it.
of this little creature, because there was a chance that I wasn't coming back. There was a there was a better chance that the boat wasn't coming back, and I didn't want to come back and have to tell Boz. His name was Boz Malcolm, Boz that I had to abandon, this little creature that he'd had for 30, almost 40 years at sea. I don't think I'd be able to live. I wouldn't be able to live that down. I'd never be able to forgive myself. So I didn't want it. I wouldn't take it. But I mean, he's way bigger than me, and I couldn't say no. So I took it. And I, you end up talking to things, right? You end up. So I decided I was going to have this conversation with Salty, but he needed to have a voice. So I created this character. I called him Sir Salty,
Nice.
and he was always Sir Salty McNe'er-do-well, Sir Salty McUnhappy, Sir Salty McHungry, Sir Salty, McAdmiral. So he was always up to no good. So he's, he's basically my, well, I don't know how you describe it. I mean, I guess Wilson.
Your
People know the movie.
companion, your
Yeah.
buddy.
So yeah, I'm not sure if people have seen the Tom Hanks movie Castaway, where he starts
Hmm.
talking to the soccer ball, Wilson, and the Wilson
Ah,
soccer
yeah.
ball. So that was people's,
Hmm.
oh, there's your Wilson. So what's interesting about Salty was I couldn't like every I had 3,000 kids from all over the world follow the trip, and the rule was if they email me, then I email them back. So I'm still, every now and then I still get an email, and I still have some I've unanswered. So I've got to be careful about living up to things. So my apologies to some of those kids. I haven't gotten back to them yet, but I about even from adults, about every easily one third of all the comments I got, or one third of the emails, were about Salty. Like, what's Salty doing today? Well, how come Salty did this? How come Salty did that? And I couldn't figure it out. I couldn't
And
figure
that's
out
why
for
you wrote the book?
yes. So I got back. So you have to write a children's book. You got to write a book. You got to write a book about Salty. So I wrote this
Hmm.
children's book. But I realized, given it some thought, that everybody has had a Salty of some description. They've had a stuffed animal that gives them, as a child, that gives
Hmm.
them some sort of comfort, whether it's a blanket, a
Yes.
pillow, a stuffed animal, a favorite toy. So they realized, oh, well, oh, this guy's, maybe he's sort of normal because he's got a stuffed animal that he likes, and everyone can relate to that. So remember I talked
Hmm.
about earlier about there's people are looking at what you've done and trying to find some commonality with something in their own autobiography. So clearly having a stuffed animal and talking to it for comfort, right, is people can relate to that. So I think that's one thing that they could relate it to. There's all this thing about Salty. Oh, you got to. So Salty was, it's not. I never figured it to be a children's book because it was, the content was, he was always drinking. Like Salty was, he was always wanted, because sailors, they would, in the old days, they would get a ration of beer and grog, of rum, right,
Hmm.
watered down rum,
Yes.
and it was a shockingly, the in the British Navy, the ration of beer, if I'm not mistaken, was 2 gallons a day. So this isn't beer that you and I would drink. It's watered down, but beer, because it has
Yeah.
alcohol in it, tends to keep more than just fresh water. So anyone, maybe if I told you that if you got to go to sea, you'd get 2 gallons of beer a day, a lot more people would sign up. I'm not sure. So anyway, Salty was always looking. He was always complaining about me, the captain, not being fair with the rations of grog and beer, and complaining about the food because he's a seal and he wanted fish and I could never catch a fish, and he was always complaining about the work, and I was overworked and always underappreciated. So there's some, I guess, I would shudder what to think what a normal, like a properly trained psychiatrist and psychologist would think about my conversations with, that there I would be truly afraid of that. I'd be truly afraid of sitting down with someone like Jordan Peterson after having read all my Salty stuff, and then he goes, "Okay, Bert, let's talk about you." I think I'd stick my head in the sand. I think I'd be the ostrich. I'd
uh,
go, "No, let's not. I'm going to turn away." Turn away.
sure. Bert, it was a pleasure talking about all these fantastic adventures that you went through. It's definitely a point, and I would love to check your books actually, because now I'm getting very interested in. But yes, definitely let's put a pin in this. I will link them down for sure, so everybody can actually check them
Mm.
and have maybe a talk with Mr. Salty.
Yeah, yeah, Salty. He's quite a character.
Thank you very much.
Oh, it's been my pleasure. It's been wonderful talking to you, and it's very. I have to say how grateful I am for the fact that we went everywhere, and there wasn't, okay, not a particular limit on it. So I want to thank you for providing uh, me the opportunity to talk, to blabber on and on and on, and I've enjoyed every minute of it.
Thanks a lot.